Hi everyone, welcome to the Class Foundation's second regional forum of 2022. We're very happy and excited to have you here with us today. As you know, we'll be focusing on the Dutch and Belgian student housing markets. Last year at our conference in November, we had a lot of conversations with members of our community and came up with what we're calling the Collective Agenda for Change, 6 themes that we're exploring throughout all of our events this year. And today's focus is going to be on policy reform. We start off the day with our friends from Loyens Loeff, our venue hosts, Paul and Olivia, who specialize in tax and legalities of the Dutch and Belgian markets. I believe, Paul, you're specialized in Belgium? In the Netherlands, okay. And then Olivia, you're Belgium, that's correct? Yeah. So without further ado, I will hand it off to them to give a small presentation, and then we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy.
Okay.
Shall I sit next to you?
Yeah. So, all welcome here at Loyens Loeff. Well, what I want to do this afternoon with you is point out some legal lease aspects for student housing, because I think that these items may be of interest for investing decisions and to know how it works in general. Because to start my introduction, residential leases and lease law is quite complicated in the Netherlands. You have the Dutch Civil Code and a lot of regulations, and well, even for lawyers, it's sometimes difficult to understand how all these regulations and law come together. But the whole idea is, the aim is to protect the tenant. The tenant is protected against the landlord. And this afternoon I want to introduce to you 2 aspects of that, being the rental price protection and the termination protection. Because I think that are 2 aspects that may be of interest for investment decisions. To start with, the rental price protection. The market in the Netherlands for residentials may be divided in 2 different sectors. It's the regulated or social housing sector and the non-regulated or liberalized sector. Whether you're in one of the 2 sectors is decided by the rent. And though you're free to decide on the rent, the landlord and the tenant, if it points out that the unit is in the regulated or social housing sector, then the rent will be based on a system, a valuation system with points. And at this moment, I will come back to that later. At this moment, the division is between prices up to 763 and 47 cents per month. All below is regulated and all above is liberated. And liberated means you can agree on any rental price what you wish without the possibility that it is corrected. This housing evaluation system is quite complicated. It's based on points. For example, to give you an idea, for every square meter that is leased out, you get a point. 1/3 of the points is based on the valuation of the property in the market. For things like a kitchen, your shower, the heating system, double glass, isolation measures. Does it have a balcony or maybe even a little garden, storage facilities? Well, for all this you can obtain points, and the number of points correspond with a rental price. And that is decisive for the question whether it's liberalized or not. if every tenant has the right during the first 6 months after the commencement of the lease to ask a certain committee, it's called the rental committee, to establish whether the lease is regulated or liberalized. If the rental committee determines that the property is regulated, the rental committee will determine the maximum rental amount in accordance with the corresponding points. So they can set the price on a price based on the number of points that are awarded on basis of this system. In the market, you see that most of the landlords do base their rental price directly on the number of points, because almost every student is aware of this system, and to avoid going to the rental committee with an obvious outcome of the proceedings, well, they offer it just for the correct price, because there's no need to put a lot of energy in such, well, it's not really litigation, but such procedures. So you have to understand then that you're bound to certain prices based on the number of points that a certain unit will score in the evaluation system. Another important aspect of this is the annual indexation of the rental price. For non-liberalized units, it is the ministry, it's the government who establish every year the percentage of the annual indexation. It used to be always like 4%, but for example, last year it was 0% also because of the Corona crisis, and it was for the government a very cheap present to fix the percentage on 0, because they didn't have to pay it, but the landlords had, of course, to pay this generous gift from the government. Yeah, this is the basis. There are a lot of rules. For example, if your income is too high for the unit you're leasing, a higher percentage is possible, and the landlord has the right to ask the taxation officer to reveal the yearly income of the tenant. But I will not go into these details. This is the basis, and just bear in mind that it's a higher percentage is possible if the tenant in question is renting a space that is well, too cheap, so to say, for its for his actual income. Okay, so this is a system. It is what it is. So you're bound to a certain rental price, and the indexation is not for the parties to decide, but will be decided by the government. Yes, then another point where the tenant is highly protected is the termination of the lease. The whole idea is that the landlord can only terminate the lease on certain legal grounds, limited legal grounds. And in some cases, the landlord has to prove that there is an alternative comparable living space available for the tenant, so that he can move elsewhere and not become homeless. There are in principle 3 different agreements that you can make on the term of the lease. You can lease out for an indefinite period of time, a fixed period of time exceeding 2 years in case of self-contained properties and 5 years in case of non-self-contained properties. Self-contained properties are properties with all their own facilities, like a kitchen, toilet, bathroom and front door. And I think most of the time student housing, some of these facilities will be shared. For example, the front door will be shared or the kitchen will be shared. And then it's automatically non-self-contained properties. that offers the possibility to lease out for 5 years. And of course, also a fixed period of time is shorter. The big difference is that in the first 2 cases, the tenant is protected by termination of the lease by the landlord, and in the third, not. Then the landlord can terminate the lease without stating any ground, just because of the term of the lease has lapsed. But bear in mind, this is not flexible. If you conclude a lease for 4 years, you're bound to it. If you want to terminate it early, it's not possible. And if you want to extend it, it becomes automatically a lease for an indefinite period of time. On what grounds can the landlord terminate a residential lease? These are the 3 most important. An urgent need to use the real estate itself. Well, for an investor, this will hardly ever be the case, because I cannot imagine an investor living in a student house. The tenant not behaving as a good tenant, and the realization by the landlord of a zoning plan applying to the lease space. Well, this is also very seldom the case. So the tenant not behaving as a good tenant is then in principle the only ground on which you can terminate a lease, also terminate a lease early. In the third case, so that's a fixed period of time, shorter than 2 or 5 years. You can terminate the lease against the last day of the term without stating any mandatory ground. The landlord should be aware that he informs the tenant for that, because if he fails to give timely notice, the lease will continue for an indefinite period of time. But there is a better solution. This is the good news. A couple of years ago, the so-called campus lease has been introduced, meaning that the term of the lease is connected to the duration of the study of the tenant. So, if the student finishes its study, that gives the landlord the right to terminate the lease without any other ground than that the student has finished his student. This is no longer a student. But this is only possible if the next tenant will also be a student. So the facilities should especially be used for only students. It's not that you can say we terminate the lease and then we will lease it out to other categories of tenants. To enable it for the landlord to check whether the tenant is still studying, he can ask every year to the tenant to provide proof of enrollment at a university or a Dutch high school. And if the tenant fails to do so, then that is also a reason to terminate the lease. So with this campus lease contract, you have the flexibility. You also have the certainty as landlord that the tenants will leave at a certain date, that you can lease it out to new students, so that you are not confronted with people that stay forever and ever, the eternal students, so to say. There's also now just introduced, I think it's only a couple of weeks that this has become law, is the temporary environmental permit. Because of the housing crisis, if a municipality has a parcel of land that it has no use for in the near future, it can give a temporary permit to build temporary housing, for example, student units, for a maximum period of 20 years. It can also be shorter, 15, 10, but the maximum is 20. And that means that after those 20 years, you're expected to remove the facilities, the housing, but it gives you the right then to terminate the lease, so that you're not confronted with claims of tenants that they have a right to a longer lease term. And normally, these are container modules that are used, and after 20 years, well, most of the time they're at the end of their economical life span. Well, that gives the municipality the flexibility that after 20 years it can decide on a new destination for the parcel of land. It can be a good investment for an investor to have these facilities there for 20 years. And then you can calculate in front what the rental price will be based on the point system. And you have the certainty that you also can terminate the leases timely at the end of the period for which the permit has been given by the municipality. Well, these were the two aspects of Dutch lease law that I wish to discuss with you. I expect that you may have some questions. I'm happy to answer them, so do not hesitate to pose questions. Yeah? Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the point system also sees to shared facilities. So, for example, units for students with, let's say, 20 rooms and shared facilities like a kitchen and showers and toilets, etc. Then the point system also has a system how to evaluate the rental prices for such facilities. And my advice would be to hire an expert because it's complicated material. So, but it's still possible to calculate the rental price in advance so that you know what the rental income will be for such units, and there you can base your decision on. So the law does provide also a point system in the situation that there are shared facilities. Thank you. Yeah, is that? Between students living in... students with families that live in student accommodation or PBSA, for example. Is there any kind of particular legal frameworks that maybe... For private persons who lease out to students, who have a room in the left over in their house, and they say, well, we could lease it out to a student. Yeah, well, but then it will probably not qualify as student housing unless you can prove that the room will be rented out also in the future to students. But then there is this temporary lease with a maximum of 5 years. So it's possible, for example, to lease it out in first instance for 2 years, and if you're all happy, then you can extend it. And if not, you can terminate it as landlord and find a new tenant. Microphone.
Okay, people at home, sorry. I meant more so, you mentioned that you need to be able to kind of, when you're living in student accommodation, you have to prove to the landlord that you are a student. But
yes.
If you have children that are not students living also in those buildings, how does that work?
Well, then you have probably a very luxury student housing if your children can live there too. Because normally it's just a room. But yeah, if you have children, of course, it doesn't apply to your children that they have to be enrolled at the university. So if the mother or the father is enrolled, then that is in principle sufficient. But I don't think this situation will occur much because, well, if you have children, I hope that you find a better place for your children, because student housing is, well.
You didn't look at some of our site tours this morning. There was.
Oh, you saw some
nice
luxury. Okay. No, of course, every tenant is allowed to have children, and these children, there's no need for them to be enrolled in a university. Impossible, I would say. So yeah, that's possible. But the duration of the lease is still tied to the mother or the father being a student enrolled at a university or a high school. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Any other questions? Or no? Then I will ask Olivia to tell you about Belgium.
Thank you. Can I? Yeah. So is this perfect? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Olivia Oosterlink from the Brussels office of Loyens Loeff. I'm a lawyer specialized in lease law and transactions, so very happy to be presenting to you the legal framework of student lease in Belgium. To give you an introduction, you might know that Belgium is known for its fragmented and regionalized legislation, which doesn't make our work any easier, but we have 3 regions in Belgium: the Flanders region, Brussels region, and the Walloon region. And each region has indeed introduced its own residential lease act, from which the tenant lease is one chapter, which falls under the residential lease regime. For the purpose of this presentation, I will be focusing on Brussels and the Flanders region, because the Walloon region is very similar to the Brussels region legislation. And we see the higher student population, or the biggest student population in Flanders and Brussels. The biggest city in Flanders is Ghent, if I'm not mistaken, and Brussels is our city, our capital, with the largest student population. So that's why we will be focusing on these 2 regions for this presentation. And there are quite some differences. There are also quite some differences with the Netherlands, which is interesting. The first difference is that in Brussels, the parties can opt for the student lease regime. So it's an optional regime for which both parties will choose in their lease contract, and then makes it applicable. So for us as well, there are quite some protections in the provisions for student leases, whereas in Flanders, as soon as the student, or the user of the premises is a student, falls under the definition of student, so inscripted in a high school or a university in Belgium, as soon as he is a student, the student lease provisions apply. And this is to avoid some kind of practice where the student lease agreements were concluded with the parents to avoid student lease application. So now the decree in Flanders really states explicitly that as soon as the user falls under the definition of student, the student lease law applies. Whereas in Brussels, they can opt for it. And also one difference is that in Brussels, the student can decide to register their main residence in the premises, whereas in Flanders, this is not allowed. It's a second residence. And in my view, this is also coming from a sort of a cultural difference in Flanders and in Brussels. In Flanders, or that's what I experienced, it's really the practice that the student goes to their kot, as we say, from Monday to Friday, and then goes to the parents in the weekend. Whereas in Brussels, there's more an international student population, in my experience also. So it does make sense that for reasons of administration, they are allowed to register their main residence in their premises, but it's not allowed in Flanders. So let's dive into the rent price. I do have a much more simple story to tell than Paul, because in Belgium there is no regulation of the rent price. It's freely determined between parties and freely determined on the market. So really depends on location, facilities, demand. That's it, yeah. It's freely determined. There are 3 remarks to be given here. In the Brussels region, the Brussels government published an indicative rent price calculator on their website. I do invite you to look that up on the website of the Brussels Housing Department. Based on location, also energy efficiency of the premises, some standard questions. They give you a fork of non-binding rent prices, so interesting. In Flanders, there's one protection to the tenant, that the lease agreement must provide obligatory the compensation, so the rent and the fixed charges, to really avoid that landlords publish low rent prices for the premises, and then students are faced with high charges. So that's a kind of a protection there for the tenants. It must include both. And also one final remark to be given there is that in Belgium, universities also have facilities for students. I know that the Catholic University of Leuven has quite some facilities. These are smaller rooms with lots of common facilities, but these rents are clearly below the market rent prices of private student housing. So these are the remarks. Really short on indexation. It is allowed for lease agreements exceeding 1 year. This is the general principle in our Belgian lease law. But in Flanders, the maximum, or the duration of the lease agreements for students is 12 months. So this is really common practice, mostly from September to September, at the start of the academic year. And if you have subsequent lease agreements of 12 months with your landlord, it is not allowed to increase the base rent each year, because it is really considered as a new lease agreement each year. It is allowed to increase your rent if you can prove as a landlord that the 2 are written down here. The value of the building increased due to, with 20% due to new circumstances, or 10% due to works that occurred in the building. So this is the exception to increasing your base rent. And one small remark on COVID-19, because I followed the case law and the impact on the lease situation in Belgium. Not much to say, actually. There was no regulation here. It was based on the willingness of the landlord. But we did see that most landlords granted rent incentives or waived 50% of their rent price. So that was something that we saw and that I would give away here. So that's with regard to the rent price. Contract duration, also some takeaways here. Both regions, Brussels and Flanders, have something very particular, that is that the tenant, the student, is allowed to prematurely terminate the lease agreement prior to the entry into force. So let's say that you conclude a lease agreement with a tenant in April for the start in September, then he is allowed. In both regions, the reasons are a little bit different, but they are allowed to prematurely terminate this lease agreement. In Brussels, the student has to pay a termination indemnity of 1 month, and in Flanders, a termination indemnity of 2 months if he terminates within 3 months prior to the entry into force. So there's a small difference, but both is applicable in both regions. There was lots of discussion for this termination possibility, because the fear was that students would conclude different lease agreements and then choose the best room in the end. But the fear was not really necessary, because in the end, I think I read that 2% applied for this, and I think that the termination indemnity is a good scare off, so it's not really used. That being said, throughout the term of the lease agreement in Brussels, the student is allowed to terminate with a termination possibility of 2 months without motivated reasons. And in Belgium, in Flanders, I'm sorry, this is possible if he ends his studies or if one of the parents deceases. So here the motivated reasons are a little bit different. So these are the termination possibilities. And then to close off, very short, because I'm not a zoning and planning specialist, but there are quite some takeaways to be told here, because we do see more often in Belgium the large student accommodation complexes being constructed. In Belgium also the zoning and planning regulations very difficult. I do recommend to go to a specialist. There is compliance with urban planning regulation, etc., different zoning plans, housing codes. Even the municipalities can decide on good urban planning to have a separate regulation. So in Ghent, something particular to say here is that in general the destination is housing and residential for student living, but in Ghent they decided to opt for a special destination, and that's community facility for large-scale student accommodation. I don't have any breath anymore. So that's something particular to say here. For Ghent, this is particular. And then there are also fire safety requirements, labels that can be applied for. So also interesting to note. Checking if I'm not forgetting anything. Are there any questions for Belgium? Yeah. No, it's not working.
Still the same? Okay,
voilà.
now it works. So I have a small question in respect of subsequent lease agreements. Like you said, you have like a rental price of, let's say, 400 euros, and you're only allowed to renew the rent agreement with an indexation. So let's say, for the sake of example, 440 euros. But if the landlord wants to increase it to, let's say, 500 euros, then it's against the law to do this with the same tenant, with the same student. But can you just say, okay, then please leave and we'll make room for a new tenant? Or do you have some kind of right as a tenant to demand that that the landlord does still conclude a rental agreement at the 440 euros? Because otherwise it's a right from the law or based on the law. But if the landlord can just say, okay, bye student, and we'll apply 500 euros, then you have not much to say as a student. But I don't know whether that's the case in your opinion or not.
That's a good point. So the principle in Flanders is indeed that the maximum duration is 12 months, and they opted for a fixed duration. It's also not allowed to provide in your lease agreement that it's automatically renewed. So it stops by law. There is no notice of the tenant, and this was actually introduced to protect the tenant also for when the student forgets to terminate its lease agreement. So I think the negative downside of this regulation is indeed that if he does not renew its lease agreement, or if they don't conclude a new lease agreement, then yes, indeed, it can be rented to another person, and then the new or the principle applies that parties can freely decide on the rent price. So it's true, if the landlord finds another student for this same premises who wants to pay a higher price, then indeed that's correct. If the student does not have any protection there in the law to demand from the landlord that he should lease out to him again at the same rent price. The only protection that he has is that if he concluded a new lease agreement, the landlord cannot request for indexation, because it's really a new lease agreement, and also no new base rent except in these two circumstances.
Because it's funny, even if the student is aware of the increasing prices and is willing to pay even €100 plus on top of the current price. Yeah, but it's obligatory to respect the law. So even if the student agrees to apply a higher price, it's still...
If the student agrees, parties can, of course,
I think
sign a new lease agreement with a new
not
price.
A higher price.
Yeah, for a higher price. But the student will not do that, I think. But yeah, indeed, good point. Are there any other questions?
I have a question. You mentioned that in Flanders, they cannot register on the address that they're staying in, like whatever student housing it is. How does that work for international students who are there? Because, for example, in the Netherlands, the first thing we need to do is to be registered in whatever municipality we're living in. And through that, we can have a bank account and so on. So that's a mandatory thing. So how does that work for international students in Flanders who are not able to register in their student residences?
So in Brussels, it is allowed to file for your domicilie, as we say, as for your main residence. And that was my point, that I do believe in Brussels there are more international students. It's a higher international student population, so they are allowed to file their residence there. In Flanders, it's really chosen because it's a second residence principle. They also pay a tax on second residence, and indeed, if you're located in Brussels, it's allowed. If you do it in Flanders, it's allowed as well, but you will just sign a general residential lease agreement with your landlord. It will not fall under the lease for student lease provisions.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our speakers. Please a round of applause. So I think we are ready for some well-deserved lunch. So if you can make your way out to the area by the bar, we've got some refreshments and drinks, and we'll be picking up the program again in an hour.
Thank you so much for joining us here today at the beautiful Loyens Loeff headquarters in Amsterdam. And also for the people who have joined us at home, thank you for tuning in. I just kind of want to let you guys know that yes, you can ask questions in the crowd, but we also are using our wonderful swap card. So not only can you network with each other on there, but you can also submit some questions, maybe answer a few polls, and we'll also integrate that into our panels as they're happening. So talking about the panels, we have some amazing people on the stage today, and I'm very, very excited to kind of create diversity on the stage. People from the housing sector, yes, but also the government, the HE sector, both public and private. So I'm really excited to delve really deep into some of those kind of challenging topics that we're facing in the Netherlands. So I'd like to invite up Glide, Frederic, how are you doing? Who is just going to say hello and why it's important for you guys to kind of sponsor events like this and why you're involved.
Yes. Hello. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm Frederic. I work for Glide in Europe. I would like to say it's very nice to see you. It's really good after this COVID situation that everybody's back able to travel and that we can meet people face to face again. So we're very delighted to be here today. Glide is the platinum sponsor today. What Glide does is offering connectivity and networks in the student and residential area. That's both in Europe and the United Kingdom. We would be glad to tell you all about it because we have organized a little cocktail at the end of the event to celebrate the lovely fact that everybody's here together and as a little reward for everybody who made the effort to be here. And we'll be glad to speak to you during the cocktail. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so just going to do a little shout out as well to the rest of our sponsors. So Facilities, who is our gold sponsor over there at the back, Diane Dow, give us a wave. Thank you so much. Also for Salto Systems, our silver sponsor. Can I find you? Can I find you? Hello, there you are. And you can also speak to both of these sponsors, including Glide as well, using the swap card. So if you would like to connect at home, you can also do it that way as well. Look at how technical we are. I would also like to just say a real special thank you to Loyens Loeff. I can speak for myself, the food was pretty goddamn good. So thank you for letting us have and share this amazing space and be able to put on this fantastic event. So thank you so much to Loyens Loeff over there as well. Also for the Q&A that happened this morning, which was really insightful. And finally to Eagle Eye, who hosted a wonderful boat party yesterday. So big shout out to those that were at the site tours this morning and was feeling slightly tender. Congratulations for doing that, realizing that we're not as young as we once were. So, with that said, I'm going to ask Frank to come up onto the stage with Aranima, who is our a wonderful program curator, to tell us a little bit about today.
Thank you very much. And let's go straight into it, Aranima. Yeah.
Hi everyone, welcome. So the program and all the content that you see together, I worked very hard with Frank and with all our speakers today. Sorry about that. To put it together, I'll just walk you through very quickly what we are going to be doing, discussing, arguing today. Our first session is on internationalization of the Netherlands and the kind of policy reform and which areas of policy reform we're looking at. This particular panel is very close to me because I am one of the people who's an international from the international cohort in the Netherlands. I was a student and now I work here, and the debates that we're really looking at is, while internationalization is definitely something that we perceive as positive, it does come across with a lot of tensions, a lot of complexities. So the first panel would focus on largely identifying these complexities. Then we have a short break. Then we would move on to Data Insight by Knight Frank, who would be looking at the current state of the Belgian and the Dutch PBSA market. And then finally, we move on to the State of Student Living panel, which would focus largely on Netherlands. And here we really look into that. It's the prognosis is that there are, in the next 8 years, the Netherlands would have a shortage of 60,000 student homes. So how are our operators, our both social and private housing student accommodation providers are sort of responding to this huge gap? Then we move on to the closing remarks, and I move on to Frank. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aranima. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so good afternoon on my behalf as well. I know most of you from pre-COVID and also online during the COVID events. For those that I haven't met, my name is Frank Oefen. I started this with a couple of other groups here in the Netherlands in 2010. It was called the Class of 2020. Because there was a housing crisis being caused by an influx of new students to the university cities across the Netherlands. A lot of them were international at that time, but it was very, very early phase. And I have to say, we thought we were gonna, by 2020, that was our goal, solve that crisis together with the policymakers, the universities, both the private and the non-profit housing sector. But we haven't really succeeded. As Aranima mentioned, the crisis currently, the housing crisis, is not just a student housing crisis, it's a national housing crisis. It's impacting everybody, but the people from Kences and the ministry have actually identified that the current shortage that is predicted for 2030 is around 60,000 rooms alone in the Netherlands. So we have a real challenge. The class, for those that haven't been to an event yet, has from the beginning always been about bringing people together from different sectors and creating meaningful conversation and dialogue to find solutions, initially in the Netherlands, but now across Europe and sometimes even beyond. And we use media for that. We have our website, of course. We have research available there. We do events, newsletters, etc. But we also As you can see here, we have partnerships, partners that enable us to do these events like today, but also partners around content, research, collaborations, and some of the research that we're doing. We're particularly keen on understanding the relationship between student accommodation and student living at large, so the success of students, their academic performance and their well-being, which has become a major topic, but also to help the market understand where demand will happen. We do a survey in the spring to already understand if there are going to be any pressure points in September, trying to inform the market, both the housing providers as well as the universities and the cities where the demand is expected to peak, and also to look with the investors and the operators in where those parties are going to invest and what their ambitions are, so we can also really monitor the market together with partners like Knight Frank. So the big question, 60,000 rooms. Can I have the next slide, please? Why is this number so high, and how do we understand it? I think for many of you that are not in the Netherlands, you probably know that although it's a beautiful, beautiful day, it's not the weather that usually attracts internationals to a country like this. I think it's a combination of very attractive higher education as well as job opportunities. So we thought it would be really good to take this panel, the first panel, to really focus on understanding what those underlying trends are and which policies are currently causing this increasing conflict in the market. Because I think in the 10 years, 12 years now that I've been working on this topic, I've never seen the debate so polarized. It's really, really, it sometimes hurts a bit because it's sometimes even like one group against the other. And this is something that I've never seen before. So hopefully we will be able to debate today solutions that help everyone, and that we provide you with information that understands it. And in the second panel, we also have people that actually will be able, hopefully, to build those 60,000 rooms. If you go to the next slide. Next one. So the three policy arenas that I think are critical to understand, especially if you're dealing with a housing crisis, is the demand and supply side, both on the student market, but also in the larger workforce. So we'll pay attention to that with the panel. But you see that they're very interconnected and everything influences each other. But they're often very separate policy communities, meaning that if someone takes one action on one side, it has an impact on the other, but those are not always acknowledged or taken into account. So if you go to the next slide, there is this amazing initiative, I think it's unique in Europe, which is called the National Action Plan for Student Accommodation. And this is something that Yolande B. and the team from Kences have been spearheading, and big thank you for all the efforts that you put in that. We've been working together with municipalities, ministries, universities, commercial student housing providers, non-profit housing providers, student unions, everybody basically that has a stake in this for the last couple of months, about identifying first what are the issues that we're trying to tackle, and then also come up with actions, basically solutions, opportunities to solve the crisis. And this action plan is still in preparation, final stages, and it's going to be signed and debated. We don't know yet, but in September for sure. We have the summer for that, Dutch summer, nice polder until we get there. But what's really interesting is that the issues that have been identified is on grip on demand, basically trying to understand how we can manage the incoming group of students, expanding and preserving the current student accommodation supply. Affordability and quality, a major issue. As you know, the prices have been going up very, very quickly, so it's impacting a lot of students, especially those that have smaller wallets. Dealing with peak demand and temporary housing for internationals, because internationals have been identified as one of the largest accelerators of demand. So basically, their numbers are growing. As you know, demographically, the Netherlands is more or less stable in terms of its population, but the participation in higher education across the Netherlands is increasing due to further internationalization. So that those are the areas of action, and I think the second panel will have some good questions to discuss around this. But before we start, we wanted to share a quick interview that we did with Ingrid de Bont. She was part of the task force, I was going to say, I don't even have, yeah, that's the task force of the Landelijk Actieplan Studentenhuisvesting. She couldn't make it today, but she wanted to tell us briefly how she sees the issue of student accommodation at the moment from her perspective as a policymaker.
I'm Ingrid de Bont. I'm working for the local government for the city of Rotterdam, and I'm an advisor on housing. And there is a limit on the amount of houses we can add in 1 year. And we have to divide these houses between a lot of groups. And so what we see is that in the next few years, it won't be possible to add enough rooms for students to keep up with the enormous growth that we see. The enormous growth of the population of mostly international students. We have reckoned that it's also coming out of research that the Dutch students, the growth of the Dutch students in Rotterdam will be about 1,000 students until 2028. But the growth of international students, that will be around 5,000 until 2028. So, and well, it's impossible to housing them all. So we think something has to be done on the recruiting or the influx of the international students. We cannot have let them come without offering them a roof or a room. Yeah, well, I think it's very important that we work together, that we speak each other regularly. Also, we should be all aware of the housing problem, and that there won't be a solution within a short time. But of course, we can do a lot of things. In Rotterdam, we try to manage and to investigate whether it's possible to house 2 students on 1 room, and we are going to see where it's possible and under what circumstances. And we also work together on creating flexible housing. But also creating flexible housing costs more time than we would like to. So we hoped we could develop flexible housing in 1 year. But now we have like 6 locations in Rotterdam for flexible housing. And the first location we started with was 3 years ago, and it's not yet ready yet. So it also takes a lot of time. There are a lot of rules and long procedures we have to keep up with. So yeah, it's hard to develop new housing in a short time, also when it's temporary. Yeah, the legislations is too difficult, and the procedures are take too much time. For the flexible housing, the government has created possibilities to follow a shorter procedure when circumstances are normal, but in practice, circumstances are never normal. So when, for example, the amount of noise pollution is too high, or when local residents have objections against the development or the housing project, then still the larger procedure is needed. So yeah, that's why we almost never can follow the shorter procedure. Yeah, but I think there are also good changes in policy. A good development is that housing cooperations are getting more financial resources the coming years because the owner tax will be abolished. So that's a good development. Yes. Well, in Rotterdam we built high-rise, and that can be very suitable, I think, for student housing. Although in high-rise, it's even more important, I think, to create communities by, for example, by adding meeting rooms. But well, in Rotterdam, the restrictive of land is not the main problem. The main problem is that we cannot add as many houses as we want in each year, or as we need in each year for serving all the groups. And the way to get it into balance is that the amount of students who go abroad from Holland should be the same amount as the international students who come to us. So when more students, Dutch students go abroad, there are more places. There's also more housing for students to come to study here. And now that's not in balance.
Yes.
Now, I wish your organization and all the participants of this event good luck and wisdom. And I think working together on this issue and is very important. We will need each other to solve the issues we are facing with. Yeah.
True. If a city like Rotterdam, which was always the city where
Ingrid de Bont. I'm working for the local government.
Couldn't be here, but then she also should just online remain once with us. No, but if a city like Rotterdam, which was an absolute can-do city with lots of land possibilities, really sees that they're struggling with even creating housing, then we know that the pressure is real. We start from a quick introduction from each, and then we'll go to your story after the interview. Gerco.
Yes, thank you for the invite. Nice to see you all. My name is Gerco Vizé. I work for the Hague International Center, which is just part of the municipality of The Hague as well, which is basically a point of contact for internationals coming from abroad to live and work in The Hague.
Well, it's nice to be here. I used to work here at a free university. I used to park my car more or less in this place for free. So it's nice to be back and look what has changed. I'm Kees de Lauw, a political geographer attached to the Utrecht University. And currently I'm mostly focused on polarization between cities and the rest of the country.
Yes, so it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Florien Snetlage and I'm a communications officer at NAVIC, the Organization for Internationalisation in Education in the Netherlands. And I'm here to tell a bit more about the recently published publications of NAVIC.
Yeah, hi, I'm Patricia. I'm here to represent Housing Anywhere in my role as policy advisor. Housing Anywhere may ring a bell to many of you, like we're a marketplace, especially focusing on connecting tenants and landlords in the segment of students, but also international talent. And I'm here to talk about policy.
Good. Hi, my name is Dennis Schonert. I'm working for the University of Amsterdam, and I'm working in the area of campus development. So not only our campuses, but also everything around the campuses, including student housing.
Ingrid mentioned that the internationalization of the Rotterdam student population is actually the generator of the growth, in especially the demand for housing. 5,000 compared to around extra 1,000 Dutch students, or I guess students from the Netherlands. Florien, can you explain to us what this growth represents and what trends you see within internationalization?
Yeah, well, actually, we see that the number of international students are still rising each year, actually. I'm here to tell a bit more about the reports that we just published. And the first one is on incoming degree mobility of the academic year 2021-22. And we actually saw that 14% of all higher education students in degree mobility are international. And this means that there were 115,000 international students in total. And this is a 12% increase compared to the previous academic year. Yes, and this figure, I hope you can see it well, it shows the total numbers and yearly growth of international students from actually 2006 until 2021. And it's, you can see 4 categories here. The lighter shade of green shows the international students enrolled in bachelor programs at research university. The darker shade of green shows the international students enrolled in master programs of research university, and the lighter shade of orange shows the international students enrolled at a University of Applied Science in a bachelor program, and the dark shade of orange, I hope we're not in front of it, but it's a really small percentage and small amount, but these are the international students enrolled at a master program at a University of Applied Science. Yes, so in total, to talk a bit more about the countries of origin, there were students from 168 different countries, and compared to actually 167, one less the previous academic year, 72.1% of these students were from the EEA, and 27.9% were from non-EEA, and these also include the UK students, because of Brexit. Then this figure shows the top 5 countries of origin, or how it changed from 2006 until 2021. It looks quite complicated, but actually you can see the top 5 countries of origin on the left side is in 2006, and you can see a top 3 of Germany, China, and Belgium. And then in 2021, it's actually for the first time that the top 3 of countries of origin is completely European. Which is quite remarkable to see, is that Romania actually overtook China. So now the top 3 is Germany, Italy, and Romania. This figure shows the number and percentage of international degree students per institution. And all circles in this figure show higher education institutions. And the bigger the circle is, the bigger the institution is. And the orange circles are the research universities, and the green ones are the universities of applied sciences. On the x-axis, you can see the number of international students, and on the y-axis, you can see the percentage. So actually the circles in the bottom left corner are the ones with the smallest share of international students, as well as the lowest number of international students, and vice versa. So on the right side of the figure, you can see the University of Maastricht and the University of Amsterdam. And actually this year, for the first time, University of Amsterdam is the higher education institution with the most international students in absolute terms. And the University of Maastricht is the university with the largest share of international students. Oh yeah, now moving on to the next report about stay rates of international graduates. And this slide shows the how many students were EEA and non-EEA after 5 years after graduation, and actually 37.6% were non-EEA students, and 18.6 were from EEA countries. Oh yeah, and these are the living and working regions, and you can see the, I think it's the number of international students, graduates that are settled in the Netherlands 5 years after graduation, and the most popular provinces are North and South Holland. Yeah, and then also the report on stay rates of international graduates includes this calculation of the economical benefits of the international students. And I can, oh yeah, it's just, I wanted to just mention that they contribute 1.5 billion euros to the Dutch treasury. I think it's good to mention. Yeah, and then we can move on to the last slide, which is about the last report that I wanted to discuss, and this is about study experience and well-being. And actually, my colleagues found that the housing situation is associated with both study satisfaction and well-being, and that about a quarter of international students are dissatisfied with their housing situation. Yeah, so I think that shows what I had to tell you from the most recently published research publications of NAVIC. We have lots of information available on the NAVIC's website as well.
Yeah. No, I think what what the numbers show is, of course, is incredible growth across Dutch universities, followed by a retention rate that allows basically a lot of the talent to find jobs here, and then there's a tendency to move towards the western part of the country, although I saw that Eindhoven was able to retain a lot of talent too, which is probably not that surprising. And what we were really happy with, that you also looked into the relationship between international students, their study experience, and also their housing, because that had not been established before. And what we saw, that a lot of students, of course, a quarter reporting that they were really dissatisfied with their housing situation should be alarming as well. But also that those that lived in a community or felt that they were part of a community actually indicated that they felt better about their housing. And this was something that also the class research showed last year. So that's, I think, very positive. Gerco, from Rotterdam to The Hague, do you recognize these numbers from your perspective? A city like The Hague has been growing a lot too. In general, its population has been growing, but also its higher education institutions have been able to attract more students. It used to be a city without a university, but since Leiden University has established a campus there, we see a lot of new students and programs coming in. What's your reaction when you see Florence data?
I think it's always great how we visualize as well where students come from, because Germany is top one, but you also see the University of Maastricht is also top one, so you already know where the borders are. But talking about The Hague is also a special city, as we said. It's a city without its own university. There's no The Hague University. It is Leiden University in The Hague, TU Delft in The Hague. The International Institute for Social Studies is Erasmus University in The Hague. So it's a unique situation as well. You're not talking to one partner, but you see all these different universities being attracted to the city, basically specifically for the profile of the city. We say The Hague is the city of peace and justice and the government, which means that the students studying political science, international studies, are coming to The Hague. And you see this is also the international side of the city attracts new international students. You see also that some other cities which are more common to deal with student issues, it's easier to fix some things. Like Amsterdam has always been a student city, Leiden, Delft, Eindhoven had a big student population, but The Hague did not. So a lot of things about student organizations, student healthcare, like student doctor or something, all these things were still missing a few years ago. So it's been a big effort as well from the universities, University of Applied Science, but also the city and a lot of people in the city to actually create a student climate. And with this, the influx of international students also comes because they have different issues, of course. So you see a lot of like effort being done to be a more student city, but yeah, student housing is an issue, just as general housing for everyone is a big issue in these big cities, in especially the Randstad area.
And when you look at the politics or the policies of I think it's your incoming new city government. What
not
kind?
Yet,
not yet. No. But what are I mean, do they see student accommodation and the growth of I guess also the economic sectors, the international companies that are locating in or relocating to The Hague, the growth of the universities themselves? How is that played out? Is there a general vision from the city on that?
Well, we have to wait for the new city government. Yeah. Probably The Hague is going to be the last one to have a city government. There's a bit political conflict around this. But for example, we're talking about the University of Leiden having a new office to be able to increase the amount of students to have, but especially the amount of degrees to have, which are connected to the city. So there's a shared vision on also why should the students come to the city. It needs to be connected to what the city is doing. But also needs to be part of this fabric, because The Hague is this image of a dusty city of civil servants, people working for the government, very well off in certain areas of the city, and students bring a different dynamic to the city center as well. So that's why they really want to invest in it. Second part is, of course, is a city with a lot of international organizations. A lot of big multinationals are headquartered in The Hague because of the government. Which also creates a different dynamic compared to some other cities. About internationalization in the city is not a new thing. We've had expats in the city for hundreds of years because the embassies are there. UN organizations are here as well. So the political debate in some cities about do we want more or less foreigners is a little bit different. That's less about students, about knowledge migrants. But we have issues as well, for example, with labor migrants. A lot of people live in The Hague, but they actually work in the Westland area, for example, where the housing conditions are entirely a different topic. But you see there's a lot of investment in a lot of cities on the international economic playing field, because we see not just multinationals, universities, but also a lot of the Dutch companies, and it might be SMEs, small, medium-sized companies, usually innovative startups, scale-ups and stuff. They all have an issue of getting enough talent in. So increasing the amount of students also is an easy way to recruit new people from abroad, because we simply don't have the Dutch people anymore to fill all these vacancies. Some statistics, I think we quote them everywhere now, is if you look at the latest CBS reports, it says for every 100 people who are unemployed, we have 133 jobs right now. So even if you get everyone who's unemployed, you retrain them, reskill them, put them on the labor market, it still doesn't work. So the debate on migration is also changing. It's not just refugees coming in. It's we need to open the gates. We need to make sure that more students come in, but also a lot of people with like the specific like technical skills, for example. We just need them to have this company grow any further.
Right. So I guess with those policies in place, and also the economic benefits that the city sees in attracting the talent, the pressure on the housing market in The Hague can be expected to continue, and you will need a lot of new housing for students, but also young professionals moving there.
We need housing for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think, some people I saw are at the real estate fair Provada, you see a lot of big cities also announcing a lot of new housing plans. But yeah, the question is it enough? Yeah. And is there actually space in these big cities to create these new houses as well? In The Hague, there are plans to create like buildings 150 meters high, which is changing the entire skyline. So you will have this political debate as well about do we want to change the whole structure of the city for this?
Yeah. Well, hopefully the debate doesn't take too long, because as Ingrid pointed out, it takes a long time to get some projects going, and you will need them soon. But Kees, we invited you because you're one of the specialists in the Netherlands trying to understand where these different ideas in policy manifest themselves in terms of the political visions, but also what the underlying trends are in society that cause these like increasingly polarizing debates around housing, immigration, international students. Can you share some of the work that you've done and how you see, how you can explain what we're talking about today?
Yes, I can. That's well, it's complex challenges. So it's trying to reduce a very complicated story into like 5 minutes. I base myself in this respect on a big book written by Andreas Reckwitz, a cultural sociologist from Germany, who wrote a fantastic book, which you should read in German, but nobody reads German. But I read it. He brings a lot of different things together, which I think are very useful, also in this context. Well, basically, it's about the change in society. Well, the first part is quite common. It's the change from the traditional welfare state, about maximizing production, equalization, and stuff like that, to more competitive society. Yeah, neoliberalism. That's a very old story. In 1980s already started, but that has continued to progress into society. So that's basically the big contribution of Andreas Reckwitz. He calls that the society of singularities. That's the competition. It's not only about economic competition, but it's in all different types of fields. It's based on excelling, on being different from others. Look around here. Every company wants to be different by expressing a different type of architecture, which is completely different from the traditional welfare state. But that goes to all walks of life. It goes to the privatizations and the competition based on excelling in singularities, and that means very much an individualization of success and failure, not only individuals but also individual companies, and based less on comparable characteristics but more on unique brand identities, for instance. And also when you look at education, the education market for people who are educated, it used to be very much based on your degree, and now it's much more based on your individual portfolio and how you created that, your biography. And that's based, that excelling and that measurement of excelling is based on the social liberal moral system. And that links up to the next slide. What's very important, the rise of the newly educated middle class, which still continues to grow. We heard that the number of higher education people is still growing, and that you can see as a result of the previous phase of the welfare state, the universalization of higher education, but it also changes how people move through society. It changed from social mobility, which used to be based on collective action. Think of social democratic parties, labor unions. Those were the drivers, used to be the drivers of social mobility, but now that is much more individualized based on educational success. And that's links then, I'm a geographer, that links to where those successes are made. Those successes are made in cities like Amsterdam, where people come from the rest of the Netherlands and all other places. And they are taken out of their context, and they're educated not only in knowledge but also in moral values, which are much more immaterial, much more based on social liberties, cosmopolitan issues. And that creates also new forms of identities. I won't go into that. That's one of my favorite topics, but I'll skip that. But the consequences are important. It results, that singularities, that competition result in many different polarizations. Not only at different scales, at the global level, which states are most competitive, but also within countries, which I think is in this respect more important. The role of cities, the knowledge economy, that creates a lot of opportunities for cities like Amsterdam and Utrecht, and perhaps Rotterdam, but I'm not sure about it, to be the triumphant economical cities. And it is linked, of course, to education, but not just only education, but also the wider field. What my economic geography college is called related variety. It's not just that you put computer scientists all together, but you have to combine them with designers and gamers and stuff like that. That's the current driver of economic success. And that creates also within societies a lot of polarization, not only with the precariat, the people who are losing out, but also spatially at different scale levels. From Fortress Europe, the keeping out specific types of migrants to gated communities. And I think also when I look at my university, that student housing is very much an enclavization, very much gated from the rest of society. And the last slide then, yeah, that's the consequences is that links up with the singularity that the winner takes it all. It creates a lot of tensions, not only political polarization, but also individual anxieties. You have to be successful. You have to curate your biography. You have to be singular. You have to be outstanding in relation to the rest. That creates of course, a lot of individual tensions. And that relates then to different types of community supports in the different settings. And the urban setting is more about how you relate to your friends, to improve your individual biography, to help each other in your success. Well, outside cities, it's much more about support networks of family and friends from the regional precariat. Put it like that, so about muddling through. It's not about helping in your education and achieving something, but it's about addressing specific issues about prices, for instance. And that's creates then also linked to the polarization driven by the individualization of success and failure. It's not only the international students, the highly educated, like most of us, but it's also linked to a kind of looking down at the others, and that relates to different politics about rights to the city. Here the politics is more about everybody has to have the right to housing, for instance. Well, the rest of the country, it's more about securing livelihood, so it's a different kind of politics. And over time, I think, that is from my latest book, it's a changeover from relational to a territorial perspective. But I won't bother with you that much. It's basically that cosmopolitan, urban, highly educated international mobility. It's still important, but it's becoming more challenged by rise, what people call populism. But you can also see that very much focus much more on territorial politics.
Great. I mean, this is incredible because I think it explains that what we see right now, the growth of internationalization of university cities, is not just something that happened coincidentally in the Netherlands. It's a larger trend across Europe and across the world. And although policy has had a big influence on creating opportunities, I think in the beginning, when you showed the slide, the growth started really around 2003, 2004, when Dutch universities started offering English taught programs. It's these larger forces that are transforming our urban communities. And what I think is also interesting is that it indicates also why some fail to support necessarily the need for student accommodation, because there are competing interests in society represented in city governments, but also nationally and even at the province, that compete for these resources and not necessarily want to encourage it further. But if I understand you correctly, the success from university cities is something that, with its consequences, can be very well understood in the larger trend.
To be more successful, it's important to stimulate international mobility and to get those international students out of their enclaves. I know at my university they put all the exchange students in one big building, and one example, sometimes I speak with German students who come to the Netherlands to improve their Dutch language skills, and they are put in this English surrounding, so the English improves, but the Dutch language skill decrease.
Yeah. Oh, and Jolanda, I'm also thinking again about some of the conversations we had between the stakeholders, and that also some people said, like, well, maybe we should build universities or at least faculties in those places that maybe have not benefited so far within the regions, to also decrease the pressure on the urban markets. That hasn't developed that far yet, but it is something that actually Dutch government did very actively, proactively, when they established universities in cities that were suffering from industrial decline. So not unprecedented. But that's not the case in Amsterdam with the University of Amsterdam, because I think you started as one of the first universities. As Kees mentioned, very much part of the DNA of the city, but also one, as Florine showed, growing the fastest. You're now #1 in terms of absolute numbers, in terms of international students. Congratulations. How is it going?
Yeah.
Any problems with those or no?
Yeah, we have loads of problems with that. Yeah. So, but yeah, for the city it's good because it's the war for talent. So you want to have more diversity on the university because it makes your programs more interesting for everyone. So also for the Dutch. So if you have more talent from abroad, it gives you another perspective on things. So that's good. But that said, there are just too much international students coming our way. So we are unable to give them what we think that is needed. And it's not only from a housing perspective, because that's really one of the key things that we're missing, but it's also on our own campuses. So we don't have enough classrooms to support all the students that are coming in. So we have to build, we have to expand the university as well. So it comes with different types of problems.
Yeah. So just maybe for those that are not too involved in the debate around higher education, the University of Amsterdam is actively asking for more control over its incoming student numbers.
Definitely.
And at the same time, you're also innovating in terms of how you collaborate with housing providers and where those housing projects are going to be. Can you elaborate on both points?
Yeah. First of all, I would say we really try to collaborate with all the housing partners, and not only in Amsterdam, but it's really the metropolitan area where we see opportunities for housing, for student housing. So it's not only in one municipality, but it is all the municipalities around it. So we are not able to solve the problem only in Amsterdam. So that's really good to know that we have to expand our view. But this also comes with problems, but because we already know the amount of housing we need, we cannot get that by building new buildings. It's just too much. So we have to also search into other areas to find other solutions, like co-living, like sharing space, and that kind of things. Yeah.
So you're looking in the region right now?
Yeah, definitely.
So also for those that are building student accommodation here, when you say the word permanent,
yep, permanent,
is now part of the UvA search area.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really all the cities around us. So Purmerend, Zaanstad, Haarlemmermeer, Diemen, Almere, Amstelveen. So it's just everywhere. So where we can get housing, yes, please.
Mm. And we also talked in the National Action Plan meetings about the role of universities. Do you anticipate that they will play a more active role in housing? Or in what form would their participation?
Actually, we rather not, because we are very focused on research and education, and we're not about housing. But yeah, then again, we need housing to support our biggest stakeholder, the students, for what that's the people we all do it for. So yeah, we try to help where we can and make things possible where we can. But we will not be engaged in building houses ourselves.
Right. Okay. Having said that, though, I know you play actively also a role in the debates around controversial projects, and that also you have been very supportive, so to say, of student housing groups like Student Experience and Duo in getting, basically the politicians to agree on a solution. Not always successfully, unfortunately.
Many things are like political choices, so you have to maneuver in the political landscape.
Yeah.
But so we try to help there.
You try to help, yeah. Great. All right. Patricia, we still have case slides on the background, but if we can switch, to your slide. We invited you not only because Housing Anywhere is one of the best resources, I would say, for data, but also because you have a particular role within Housing Anywhere in terms of policy and trying to help us understand also how these debates here in the Netherlands compare to others, in particular on housing rental regulations. But maybe one thing that I wanted to ask you first before you go to the slide, do you see like what the other panelists have shared? Do you see that reflected in the search on your website? Because for those that don't know Housing Anywhere, it's a site where basically demand and supply come together. So people offer their rooms there, whether they're a PBSA provider or individual apartment owners, and students find it. Do you see this kind of like high pressure reflected in the visits to your site?
Yeah, of course we do. Like especially also when looking at Carmanet, for instance, so really our platform that is focused on the Dutch market. Yeah, we see exactly all of those factors that play a role: international students, international talent being attracted to the market. I mean, we really are specialized in furbished apartments, so that's where our main priority lies. And internationally mobile talent, they are looking mostly for some sort of furnished solutions for the beginning at least, and then it's a question of retention. But yeah, the pressure is high.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, we'll get to that first. Online, for those that are currently on Swapcard, we also have a couple of polls live. We would love to hear what your thoughts are. So also for those that are here in the room, please check your Swapcard as we continue with the panel. And then we'll see later on what the outcomes are. But Patricia, so when it comes to the student accommodation market, there's an ongoing debate also about like how do we keep prices affordable for those that can, and a lot of and that's not just for students, but also a lot of governments in the city governments in the Netherlands are really trying to push now for regulating a larger size of the market. Can you share some of the examples where you've seen similar policies happen across Europe?
Yeah, for sure. So I picked two cases that I find noteworthy in particular. The first one being Berlin. They implemented a rent cap. So they really wanted to regulate the rental price by saying the rise is limited at a certain level. It cannot go higher. That regulation or that law was in place between February 2020 and April 21. And indeed, what we saw in 2020, when looking at the apartment prices, like just focusing on our apartments, the prices were decreasing compared to 2019, for instance. However, this is only the tip of the iceberg. So the regulation was intended to really limit rental prices. What we saw, however, if we look closer, if we really go and look beyond the tip of the iceberg, and that's on the next slide, we will see that you cannot just regulate one particular aspect of the rental market, because it will just have trigger-on effects on other segments, on other aspects of the market, like the supply. I mean, we have developers there, we have people there that are investing into housing and residential housing. With Berlin, the market prospects being so uncertain during this rent cap being in place, they were kind of discouraged to invest into the market. At the same time, landlords that really had some housing available at that time, they were also like not really in favor of providing their housing for lower prices that they were usually asking. So yeah, what we saw while this rent cap was in place is that the supply was actually decreasing by 50%. So even if on the surface we see, okay, rental prices decreased, that was actually just a very small segment of the market. These 50%, they just didn't offer their housing at all anymore. And also, so in April 2021, this measure was found to be unconstitutional. And what we saw afterwards, like all of a sudden, all of that supply was swamping the market again, which is good. But also we saw that prices were really just bouncing back. They were, so we saw this rebound effect with apartment pricing increasing even higher than we have seen before the rent cap was put into place. So the Berlin case is just a very nice example to show that sometimes policy making is really like focused on silos. Like this idea is brilliant. We want to make housing affordable, but what is actually going on is a much more complex interaction between like developers, landlords, tenants, and that complicates policy making. The Spanish case is a very interesting one, and I guess the Spanish colleagues here can talk even more about it. But well, so in the beginning of the year, the Spanish national government was developing a policy package, like really a package, huge, like think big, with not just the idea of implementing certain rent caps here and there to make housing affordable, but also providing some measures that are kind of rewarding people in a way, like subsidizing especially younger people to make housing more affordable. So again, very brilliant ideas, but so the picture here should represent the silos that we see in policymaking. So for instance, this young housing voucher that was meant to support especially younger generations to be able to move out of their parents' home, in the end was just like treating causes, symptoms, rather than really trying to tackle the cause, which is not necessarily only that they cannot move out because they cannot afford housing. I mean, why can they not afford housing is because their salaries might be too low, because there's not enough supply. So again, the situation is much more complex than just looking at one silo, and that's kind of the learning from this case, I think. And then the case of the Netherlands is a very interesting one, and I think we brought in all of the different components here because I think like just the regulations for the rental market over the past 10 years have not been too striking, not like the Berlin case, not like the Spanish case. However, like other policies in higher education, for instance, this drive to make sure that higher education is being more international, also in the end has implications for housing, as we see now. And so that was really the development in the past. Let's attract international talent. We have done that very successfully. And now we are kind of in a situation, okay, we've been really working on this part and we have mastered attracting international talent. How do we retain them in a way that it's also like sustainable, in a way that, we keep them in the market, that we make sure that they keep contributing to the treasury. And one bottleneck is kind of housing, and even though it might have been part of the planning in the early days when also internationalization for higher education was high on the agenda, now the question is, how do we move forward? And there are some gloomy futures out there that talk about limiting student numbers, and also universities really trying, faculty being really overloaded with things. I know that from my personal experience. But I mean, I also find it very, very promising and positive to see on the next slide that very recently we actually see some movement also towards, okay, we can continue like moving ahead and tackling different silos one by one. But like just the Minister of Education, like he said, let's maybe not be too hasted in what we're doing, but let's take a step back and focus on having a bigger discourse around international students, international talent. Corporates need to be on the table. Housing needs to be on the table. It's more complex than, it's not just students and housing. And also another thing that I find very positive in the Netherlands is, of course, what we see with the National Student Housing Action Plan. So it really seems that in the Netherlands we are not, we are avoiding to taking missteps, or we'll learn from the Berlin case, the Spanish case, in a case that we really try to collaborate, to come up with ideas, to sit on a table and discuss, to then develop effective policy, again, not in silos.
No, great points, and indeed a very dynamic policy arena in general. I mean, The Hague doesn't have a government yet, but also this minister has just started, so a lot more visions will be influencing the direction of both the international higher education as well as the housing market. A good reference again to the National Action Plan, which I think will be also very interesting. Brian, I don't know where you're sitting at the moment, but to pick up in the second panel, because you have a panel with parties that are currently trying to invest and expand, as well as potentially preserve some of the supply that is even at risk if regulations take the wrong shape and form. Before we go to the break, any questions for the panel? Raj.
Thanks. There's been a couple of comments about limiting international student numbers. So you showed a very interesting chart there, and I think your top 3 international student cohorts come from Germany, Italy, and Romania, I think it was, all EU countries. Could somebody explain to me how you do limit numbers in the context of European EU law?
Dennis, you want to take that one?
We can't.
You can. Just teach in Dutch.
Yeah, okay.
That explains why Utrecht is not so high up in the international internationalization scheme. We have still a lot of courses also in my department. Our bachelor is, in principle, the first year is completely in Dutch. And then we have some...
But then again, if they speak Dutch, they can come.
Yeah, sure.
And then then we still have the incoming flow of international students. So, of course, language
not that many people speak Dutch.
But Dennis, you're saying that from the university's perspective, the complexity of managing international students based on their passport is not that easy.
No, it's not easy, because we have EU legislation. It's free movement of personnel and goods and all that. So yeah.
But if you would flip it around, you say if there would be enough housing, would you also be as concerned with the growth of international students?
Yes.
Still?
Yeah,
okay.
Because it's not only about housing, it's also about our own real estate portfolio, what we have, and it's also about our staff, because it puts a lot of pressure on staff, and that also, then it's about quality of education, and so there are more things that are
at risk.
Yeah, at risk. Yeah.
Any other questions here?
I have one quick one for Florine. Thank you for providing the overview. Very interesting. Can you explain why do we see this huge influx of students from Romania?
Yeah, we can only do suggestions because we don't have reports from outgoing mobility of Romania yet. But we expect it to be the cause of Brexit, as lots of international students from the European Union chose Brexit as a study destination, and now the tuition fees are much higher for European students.
Perhaps something, if you probably look in a few years, you're going to be seeing like it's also shifts. Like next to international students, we have about 600,000 people from Eastern Europe working in the Netherlands as well. First were the people from Poland, than Bulgaria, than Romania. So as countries get a little bit richer, more people also study abroad. So what we see, for example, in The Hague, that some universities started to attract people from Eastern Europe, and now they're saying, well, there's too many. Yeah, but it's also, we've been marketing the Netherlands quite a lot in like new EU countries. So now you see that, yeah, now it's too much. And I think it's interesting to add as well, something which I hope in the national housing plan is also part of it. What you see in also central government, local government, is a change to, first we try to promote the Netherlands as a study destination. And now we're figuring out, well, actually we need people in a specific area of our university. Like University of Amsterdam is doing great in computer science, artificial intelligence, quantum and stuff like that. There cannot be enough international students in those fields because we can't find the people anymore. But it's different than in social sciences, for example, where a lot of international students come and study here. And I know a lot of Romanians and Bulgarians come for this reason and they hope to get a job here. But it's a very, yeah, it's too competitive also with the Dutch people, so they have to go home. And actually they want to stay here. So the stay rate in technical studies, for example, is quite high. But it could be even higher. So you see this debate shifting as well. We should select the students and not just get everyone in.
Okay, so last comment.
Last comment. We haven't discussed our Dutch students. In my perception as only a teacher, I see that like 20 years ago, a lot of our Dutch students went abroad for their masters.
Yeah.
Now I have the impression that they stay at home.
Yeah, yeah. Ingrid mentioned this as well. Florine, maybe you can say something about it. It's indeed true, right? Dutch students go less abroad.
Yeah, that's true. And actually there's another publication of Nuffic about outgoing mobility. I think it's recently published, or it should be published soon. So I don't have the recent numbers now, but it is indeed true that there are more incoming students than outgoing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, great. I'm not going to take more time of your break. I do want to ask you to thank the panel for their contributions. And I think we gave a lot of input already for the second panel. So hopefully those that are at home and those that are here to see you back in how many minutes? In 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Here at Glide, we're building a better connected world. Glide brings infrastructure to difficult-to-serve markets. Our purpose is to connect people, to enable them to do more. To connect people, we offer 3 services. Managed Wi-Fi networks. Our fully serviced Wi-Fi solution offers a unique, tailor-made managed internet experience into homes and businesses across the UK. With hundreds of thousands of users receiving super fast speeds and the highest security. Fibre connectivity. We have our very own fibre network running across the UK, which we're constantly expanding to keep providing high-speed internet services to more and more customers. Keep an eye out for our green cabinets dotted all over the UK. Energy and utilities. Providing electricity and gas to thousands of properties across the UK alongside other managed services, broadband, water and TV licenses. Our unique billing system helps bundle these services to provide our customers with a simple, hassle-free solution. We are a future-proof business that is able to evolve and adapt.
This is Sophie. She's a foreign student living in the Netherlands and is currently living at a student home. She is studying architecture, working in an agency, and taking dance lessons. Sophie is a busy lady. She is always finding ways to save time and be more efficient, and therefore she loves the Facility app. Last week, her window was broken in her dorm room, and with 3 simple steps, she reported this issue to her property manager, Blue Star. At Blue Star, service desk employee David receives the issue in real time, including all necessary documentation and videos added by Sophie. David reviews and approves the request and chooses a specialist who can fix the problem for Sophie. Specialist Harry accepts the request and makes an appointment with Sophie directly in the facility app. The next day, Harry fixed the problem and leaves Sophie's room with a brand new window installed, leaving Sophie behind as a satisfied tenant. Sophie rates the issue, and both Blue Star as well as Harry can see real-time how she evaluated the fix. Real estate owners and management companies across Europe are rapidly discovering the benefits of facility, while increasing margins and tenant satisfaction. Contact Facility and book a demo to see how everyone at your student facilities can benefit.
Natuurlijk, we hebben die internationale studenten gewoon nodig. En nogmaals, wij vinden dat allemaal een groot goed. En dat betekent dat we allemaal die verantwoordelijkheid moeten nemen. Het gaat over de steden. Die moeten locaties ter beschikking stellen. Of wat wij in onze praktijk zien, is dat we niet alleen in de stad, maar ook in de regio gaan bouwen. Wij zien ook hele goede voorbeelden van universiteiten die hun verantwoordelijkheid uitstekend nemen door locaties beschikbaar te stellen. Volgende week start de bouw Bioscience in Leiden. We hebben grond van de VU overgenomen om te bouwen. Dus ze nemen hun verantwoordelijkheid ook wel degelijk. Dus het is gewoon een klantgroep van ons. En het is een probleem en we moeten het met elkaar oplossen.
Nou, daarvoor zitten we hier inderdaad vandaag, om met elkaar op te lossen, precies.
Ja, maar de scholenkamertekorten moeten bouwen, dat komt op neer.
Ja, nou, dat is een hele simpele oplossing. Daar zitten we hier dan een hele sessie voor te houden, Kees.
Kijk, er wordt gesproken over Pieter zei net, een maatschappelijke kans, een maatschappelijke uitdaging, moeten we samen oplossen. Maar er zijn op dit moment in Groningen 300 studenten dakloos. En er zijn in Enschede 200 studenten dakloos. Die bij mensen op de bank slapen omdat ze geen kamer kunnen kunnen vinden.
En dat gaat om internationale en nationale studenten?
Ja, vooral internationale studenten.
Ja.
Omdat, nou, zoals gezegd, nationale studenten die kunnen dan vaak nog wel even bij hun ouders blijven. Of die hebben misschien familie in de buurt wonen. Die vinden vaak wel een betere oplossing dan bij vreemden op de bank liggen. Internationale studenten hebben die kans niet.
Nee, die kunnen niet even
maar
terug.
aan de andere kant, je kan je voorstellen, als je uit een dorp in Drenthe komt, dan kan het ook wel lastig reizen zijn naar je onderwijsinstelling.
Zeker, inderdaad. Dan kan je daar ook misschien niet op tijd komen, het openbaar vervoer.
Ja,
Nou, Lily,
ik mis een beetje de urgentie. Dat is wat ik vooral wil zeggen. Ik hoor veel beleidstaal, maar ik mis nog de urgentie van dit is een crisis. Die moeten we nu gaan oplossen.
Ja. Nou, die hebben we volgens mij nu ook echt wel, die zetten we echt wel neer vandaag. En we gaan zo meteen daarop door. Ik wil nog even aan jou vragen, Lily. Jij bent bestuurslid van de huurdersvereniging. Hè? Nu hebben we het over de internationale studenten, heel veel eigenlijk. En Nol stimt het ook aan, die kunnen eigenlijk natuurlijk niet terug. Maar daardoor krijgt de internationale student misschien wel meer voorrang. Of hoe werkt dat? Dat de Nederlandse studenten minder kans hebben.
Nou ja, kijk, alles wat je aan internationale studenten geeft, dat bouwt de wachttijd natuurlijk op voor Nederlandse studenten. Dat is gewoon hoe het is. En tegelijkertijd sluit ik me helemaal aan bij wat Nol zegt. Internationale studenten die moeten wel ergens wonen. En dat moeten we denk ik ook faciliteren. Dus je zal een voorrangsregeling moeten treffen. Maar wel op zo'n manier dat het in balans blijft met die Nederlandse student.
Ja.
Je kan van een internationale student niet vragen om zich op zijn 16e of 17e in te schrijven bij een Nederlandse studentenhuisvester om wachttijd op te bouwen. Wat een Nederlandse student wel doet. En dat is denk ik een hele grote opgave die studentenhuisvesters en huurdersorganisaties met elkaar hebben. Om naar te kijken hoe kunnen we dat voorrangstelsel op zo'n manier doen. Dat Nederlandse studenten ook nog steeds een eerlijke kans krijgen. Maar internationale studenten, zeker in die piekmaanden dat ze voor het eerst aankomen hier, wel een plek krijgen.
Ja. Nol, ik ga nog heel even kort naar jou. Wat vind jij ervan als je dit zo hoort?
Ja,
ben je het daarmee eens?
Daar ben ik het gewoon mee eens. Het punt blijft dat ik... Kijk, er worden veel oplossingen aangedragen. Er wordt gezegd... er wordt
maar hoe zou er meer urgentie gecreëerd kunnen worden in jouw optiek?
Nou ja, wat me vooral opvalt is dat misschien wordt die urgentie nu al wat meer gevoeld. Maar is dat er nu ineens heel veel mogelijk is. Maar dat er de afgelopen jaren eigenlijk te weinig gebeurd is. Je hebt altijd een vertraging. En je loopt altijd een beetje achter de feiten aan. Als je pas later gaat bouwen. Nu is er...
Dus op zich, op dit moment is er wel urgentie. We zijn er wel mee bezig, maar het mag voor jou nog wat meer.
Het mag voor mij nog wat meer. Universiteiten mogen wat meer locaties beschikbaar stellen op een campus. Gemeenten mogen wat harder zoeken naar locaties. Om het de huisvesters ook makkelijker te maken om te bouwen.
Ja, helder.
Geven er voldoende aanleiding toe.
Nou, zeker inderdaad. En we gaan straks nog meer van die cijfers zien. Maar eerst gaan we van anno nu naar de toekomst. 2030 om precies te zijn. Ja, hoe ziet het leven van een student er dan uit? We gaan even kijken naar een impressie.
Good morning, student. It's 9 o'clock. The weather outside is clouded with little chance of rain. At a temperature of 12 degrees Celsius. Good morning, student 13170. Loading today's schedule. 10 o'clock. Study time at the Digital Pollock Building. 11 o'clock. Minor at the Columbia University, Entrepreneurship and VR. 12 o'clock. Exercise at the Digital Gym. 1300 hours. Lunch meeting. 1600 hours. Meet with your friends for a beer. Digital environment loaded. Please go to the designated virtual reality desk. Enjoy your day. Welcome to the digital campus. Where would you like to go? Digital Pollock selected. Loading. $12 o'clock. Exercise at the Digital Gym.
Nou, we zagen aan het eind nog een beetje menselijkheid, maar ik hoorde hier al aan tafel gonzen. Je bent een beetje een nummer. Dat is eigenlijk een beetje het gevoel wat jullie erbij krijgen, hè? Te digitaal eigenlijk.
Ja, nou ja, als corona één ding duidelijk heeft gemaakt, dan is het ontmoeting en contact. Er is zoveel ellende geweest afgelopen jaar. En als er één norm is die duidelijk is, dat is contactonderwijs. Als norm voor kwaliteit van onderwijs. Dus ja, ik vind het een leuk filmpje, maar no way.
Laten we hopen dat het niet zo gaat, inderdaad. Nou ja, het laat in ieder geval dus een mogelijk toekomstbeeld zien voor 2030. En we hebben Lies weer klaarstaan. Want Lies, voor de monitor hebben jullie gevraagd hoe studenten nou eigenlijk willen wonen. Wat voor beeld levert dat nou op?
In de monitor inderdaad onderzoek gedaan naar de huidige woonsituatie en de woonwensen van studenten. Voordat ik hierop inga, wil ik eerst een beeld schetsen van de algehele studentenpopulatie in Nederland. Het afgelopen jaar studeerden zo'n 757.000 studenten aan een opleiding in Nederland. En ongeveer 13% hiervan was een internationale student. Als we over de afgelopen 8 jaar kijken, dan zien we dat de studentenpopulatie in Nederland met zo'n 26% is toegenomen. En zeker het afgelopen jaar is een sterke toename te zien. En deze sterke toename wordt voor een heel belangrijk deel veroorzaakt door de coronapandemie. Zo zijn middelbare scholieren hebben geen eindexamen hoeven doen, studenten hebben minder tussenjaren genomen en ook zijn studenten zelf gewoon langer blijven studeren. En daarnaast, dat zagen we net ook al in het vorige thema, zijn die internationale studenten naar Nederland toe blijven komen. Zij hebben zich dus niet laten tegenhouden door de coronapandemie. Vandaar dus dat er een sterke stijging is geweest het afgelopen jaar. Kijken we nou naar de komende 8 jaar, dan blijven we een stijging zien. Deze is wel wat minder sterk dan de afgelopen 8 jaar. En dit zal ervoor zorgen dat de studentenpopulatie naar zo'n 817.000 studenten stijgt. Dit komt over 8 jaar tijd neer op een stijging van 60.000 studenten. En een groot deel van deze stijging wordt veroorzaakt dus door de internationale studenten die naar Nederland blijven komen. Even kijken hoor. Dus als we die verwachte stijging van het aantal studenten, die werkt ook door in de verwachte stijging van het aantal uitwonende studenten. En op dit moment is de helft van de studenten uitwonend. En we verwachten dat over 8 jaar het aantal uitwonende studenten ruim 440.000 zal zijn. En ook hierin zien we weer dat die internationale student die stijgt en dus buiten de coronapandemie om eigenlijk vrijwel altijd op zoek is naar een kamer in Nederland. Ook een grote druk legt op die uitwonende studenten de komende jaren en daardoor erg stijgt. Nou, als we wat meer inzoomen op die internationale of op die uitwonende studenten en wat voor woonlasten ze dan betalen, dan zien we dat studenten gemiddeld zo'n €490 per maand aan woonlasten betalen. En dit zijn de woonlasten inclusief bijkomende kosten zoals gas, water, licht, maar exclusief maar na aftrek van de huurtoeslag. En al met al geven studenten aan dus ongeveer 46% van hun totale besteedbaar budget uit te geven aan de woonlasten. Nou, wat we wel zien is dat studenten hun inkomen aanpassen aan de woonlasten die ze hebben. Dus als we bijvoorbeeld in een bepaalde stad kijken, dan zien we dat in steden waar de woonlasten hoog zijn, de inkomens ook hoger worden van studenten. En dat dus de woonlasten per stad verder uit elkaar liggen dan dat de woonquote uit elkaar ligt. Verder nog op die uitwonende student, hoe wonen ze dan? Nou, hierin zien we verschillen tussen de Nederlandse studenten en de internationale studenten. Ongeveer de helft van de Nederlandse studenten woont in een kamer waarbij ze voorzieningen delen met huisgenoten. En bij bijvoorbeeld die studiepunt mobiele studenten ligt het aandeel veel hoger. Daar woont ongeveer zo'n 2/3 van deze studenten in een kamer met gedeelde voorzieningen. De verschillen tussen type student zien we niet alleen terug in die huidige woonsituatie, maar ook als we naar de woonwensen kijken. Dus als studenten op zoek zijn naar een woonruimte, dan houden ze natuurlijk met een tal van factoren rekening. En in ons onderzoek hebben we eigenlijk ons gefocust op 4 belangrijke factoren waar studenten rekening mee houden als ze op zoek zijn naar een woonruimte. Dat zijn de woonlasten, locatie, oppervlakte en het type woonruimte. Dus of ze in een kamer met gedeelde voorzieningen of zelfstandig wonen. Nou, en als we dan eigenlijk naar de verschillen tussen die Nederlandse en internationale studenten kijken, dan zien wij dat internationale studenten, dat ze eigenlijk allemaal wegen woonlasten het zwaarst mee. Dus de woonlasten zijn gewoon een hele belangrijke factor bij het bepalen waar ze gaan wonen. Maar die internationale studenten vinden de woonlasten nog wat belangrijker dan de Nederlandse studenten. Wat we verder zien is dat internationale studenten wat meer geven om de locatie waar hun woonruimte staat. Vaak is dit dat ze wensen om in het centrum te wonen of in de rand van het centrum of op de campus. En internationale studenten vinden het dus belangrijker om op deze plekken te wonen dan Nederlandse studenten. Aan de andere kant zien we dat Nederlandse studenten juist het belangrijker vinden om dat een oppervlakte juist is, dat het een bepaalde minimale oppervlakte is van de woonruimte. En ook het type woonruimte vinden Nederlandse studenten belangrijker. Dus Nederlandse studenten willen vaker dan internationale studenten in een zelfstandige woonruimte wonen.
Dankjewel Lies, we komen zo meteen nog een keertje bij je terug. Inmiddels is aangeschoven op de plek van Kees Frank Uffe van The Class Foundation, welkom. Jullie zijn een stichting van studentenhuisvesters in Europa. Zo'n 23.000 Nederlandse kamers begreep ik. En daarvan is het de bekendste Student Hotel.
Ja, maar ook Sea York, Raystar en wat andere partijen bouwen inmiddels veel kamers hier in Nederland. Ja.
Nou heb jij net die video ook gezien van die student ver in de toekomst. In hoeverre denk je dat dat werkelijkheid gaat worden?
Nou, ik denk dat het deels al werkelijkheid is. Ik bedoel, we hebben allemaal online onderwijs gevolgd. We hebben ook heel veel gesprekken online gevoerd. En ik denk met name voor die volgende generatie studenten dat die hybride levensstijl echt wel de norm zal zijn. Ja. Wat me ook wel opviel is dat hij ook in zijn agenda het hardlopen had meegenomen. En ik denk dat dat welzijn van studenten, dat wordt heel belangrijk. We hebben onderzoek gedaan deze zomer ook met de groep van Lies. En dan bleek gewoon dat 2 van de 5 studenten in Nederland gewoon zich echt slecht voelden in die periode. En met name internationale studenten waren nog veel kwetsbaarder. Dus dan kan studentenhuisvesting echt een oplossing zijn voor dat welzijn.
Ja, precies. Dus we gaan het hebben inderdaad over dat welzijn. Want de LSVB heeft tijdens corona ook heel veel aandacht gevraagd voor studentenwelzijn. Wat moeten die studentenhuisvesters in jouw optiek nou bijdragen aan dat goede studentenwelzijn?
Nou, het allerbelangrijkste is, op dit moment worden er veel studio's gebouwd en weinig kamers. En het allerbelangrijkste is dat je niet alleen zit, denk ik. En dat heeft de coronapandemie heel duidelijk laten zien. Ja. Studenten die op een studio in een eentje woonden, die vereenzaamden. Daar ging het slechter mee. En dan zit je de hele dag achter je beeldscherm en zie je geen echte mensen meer. En kom je weinig buiten. Dus gewoon huizen voor zeg 5, 6 studenten. Een gezamenlijke woonkeuken of woonkamer.
Dat je een sociaal leven hebt in je huis.
In je huis, precies. Ja. Dus wel privé, maar wel met je huisgenoten, met anderen. Dat is denk ik het belangrijkste. Ja, en daarnaast natuurlijk, ik vond dat filmpje, Gijsbert zei het al een beetje, het was heel veel digitaal, heel weinig menselijk contact. Ja, toch ook gewoon naar de hogeschool, naar de universiteit gaan. Om je medestudenten te ontmoeten is gewoon enorm belangrijk. Ja, precies. Dat sociale leven. Inderdaad. En Lily, wat vind jij of denken jullie dat de studentenwoning van de toekomst nou moet bieden?
Nou ja, is dat heel praktisch na te denken. Jij hebt het net over studentenhuizen met 5, 6 studenten, maar je hebt ook studentenhuizen met 10, 15, 20 studenten in één huis. Ja, als die allemaal thuis onderwijs aan het volgen zijn, mensen moeten presenteren, mensen moeten in hun werkcollege dingen vertellen. Ja, je hebt daar gewoon wel voorzieningen voor nodig in je kamer. Ja. Je hebt daar ook geluidsisolatie voor nodig in je kamer, dat je geen last hebt van de rest in je huis.
Niet meer die gehorige studentenhuizen.
Ja. Dus dat zijn, en ook de ruimte. Kijk, als je op een heel klein kamertje zit en je bed moet er staan, maar er moet ook een gewoon bureau staan waar jouw laptop op kan staan. Ja, heel praktisch. Als jij een kamer van 8 vierkante meter hebt, dan wordt dat natuurlijk een ingewikkelde om dat allemaal in kwijt te kunnen.
Ja, dus zeker bij nieuwe woningen moet daar dan dus eigenlijk aan gedacht worden, aan dat soort dingen ook.
Ja, als wij richting meer digitaal onderwijs gaan. Ja.
En Frank, welke innovaties moet de studentenhuisvesting nou maken om in jouw optiek een prettige kamer te bieden?
Nou, ik denk dat sowieso studentenhuisvestingen niet meer over kamers moeten hebben. Het gaat echt over de ervaring en de totale integratie van dat leren en dat leven. Dat is gewoon een gegeven. Dus we moeten ook veel meer nadenken over wat voor voorzieningen, wat voor faciliteiten bied je aan. En wat jij ook zei, dat betekent dat je niet alleen ruimtes moet hebben om te slapen, maar ook om te studeren, ook om in kleine werkgroepen te werken. En je ziet ook dat die digitalisering natuurlijk gewoon ook allerlei vragen stelt over van wat voor voorzieningen heb je op die kamer zelf, maar wat kan je dan bijvoorbeeld ook gezamenlijk organiseren. En we zagen dat de afgelopen jaren heel veel partijen ook bijvoorbeeld veel meer in die gezamenlijke keukens zijn gaan investeren. De begaande grond kan ook echt een publieke ruimte worden, een ontmoetingsplek met een café. En de cijfers lieten het zien deze zomer. Studenten die een toegang tot een café of een gezamenlijke ruimte hadden of gezamenlijke voorzieningen en programma's, die scoorden veel beter in hun welzijn en waardeerden hun woonervaring ook veel hoger.
Ja.
Dus dat is iets wat ik denk dat echt belangrijk is in de toekomst.
Ja, voelen zich minder
Mag ik
eenzaam.
daar een aanvulling op
Ja,
doen?
natuurlijk.
Want het gaat niet ook alleen om de sociale ontmoetingsplekken zoals een café, maar juist ook je huis delen met mensen.
Ja.
Omdat je ook thuis kan komen, op de bank kan ploffen en een serietje gaat kijken. En dat je dan niet alleen bent, maar met mensen om je heen in de omgeving binnen je eigen huis. Dus dat is eigenlijk
Ik wil daar graag bij aansluiten. En dan zien we toch eigenlijk iets heel raars. Hè? Studenten willen dit, gemeenten willen dit.
So, what an amazing panel that was. I really loved the kind of different kind of directions and insight that was, had on the stage. I think it's really going to set us off for our conversation on the state of student living. But before we have that, we have the wonderful Stuart Osborne, who is here, hello, from Knight Frank, who's going to give us a data insight into the Dutch and Belgian markets. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Really interesting panel, and I think it's for me it's kind of certainly interesting to hear about the kind of the thought process behind the kind of the regulation story and ultimately the kind of the impact of that, particularly on the Dutch market. So I'm going to do something pretty unthinkable, and I'm going to talk about investment and investors and the impact that they have on the market. And also ultimately, I guess what we see in the market at the moment, and we're going to jump around a bit on the kind of the global picture, some about the European picture. Fear not, there will be some data on Belgium and the Netherlands. So just before everyone starts walking out. But I think I kind of joke a bit, but it is quite an important part of the picture. Not least because I think particularly from a supply point of view, and one of the guys mentioned it earlier, is that there was a comment that actually being able to build, you're still not going to be able to get to that 60,000, but being able as a private sector to be able to deliver even into that 60,000 is incredibly important. So just kind of taking a step back and looking at the kind of the global story. So this is student housing volumes across the world in 2021, which, as you can see, was a record-breaking year at $22 billion, which was a 23% increase on the previous year. And I think it probably sounds obvious, but one of the key things driving this is really the strong fundamentals and track record of consistent rental growth that we see in the sector, and particularly through a global pandemic, which has a really strong relevance. I know we talked a lot about international students earlier, and obviously if you take those guys out of the market, then I know occupation struggles quite a bit, let alone when even domestic students were being told to stay at home in some markets. But the kind of the strong outturn, as you would have seen, there was kind of cross-border and domestic investment, is certainly continued by high levels. It's high levels of cross-border capital are driving a lot of that investment. And I just wanted to throw this up from the UK market as a comparison. So new entrants and returning investors across border accounted for 22%. And then when you compare that to some of the more traditional sectors, it certainly paints a pretty strong picture. So just back to the global picture. So looking across the world, so this stat here reflects total global student accommodation. So 50% of cross-border investment was from North America. So, I mean, they're becoming pretty big players, as I'm sure there's probably a few you guys in the room at the moment. But looking at European PBSA, so great global story. We're starting to see a little bit of, or we have seen a bit of a drop-off in European investments, but I think it's fair to say that student across Europe was impacted heavily by COVID, and particularly from an investment point of view as well. If we overlaid other residential investment sectors into this graph, then we'd have a very different story. And we basically had another record-breaking year last year of total residential investment, so student, build-to-rent, senior, of 100 billion euros. And that was a record-breaking year. So onto things at hand in the Netherlands and Belgium. So just having a look again at volume. So investment into Dutch PBSA, as you can see here on the left, has been mixed in previous years. Whilst the market ultimately remains robust, there's a real lack of product, which has been dictating a mixed picture. Many operators have been aggregating, developers continuing to focus on the burgeoning residential sector as well. Not least the factors that have been talked about today mean that volumes really do undersell the demand, the investment demand for good product in the space. And then looking at Belgium, on the other hand, it's very much in its ascendancy with an evolving product, consolidation happening amongst investors, such as Quares and Zior. Individual apartment sales historically have also driven the market, which we're starting to see a bit of a change now from a kind of more traditional institutional product approach. But that lack of institutional product has certainly remained a key barrier. So, I mean, who's been trading and you know, what's actually been happening in the market recently? So this slide here just highlights a few of the key transactions that have taken place in the market, which show, well, I would say a real mix, but ultimately you can see kind of Roundhill and Zior taking quite a lot of the credit in here. I won't deign to go into a lot of detail on these projects, mainly because I'm sure you can probably ask the guys here and they'll tell you the real answers. So what sits behind this investment story? So, I mean, from a market performance point of view, so here you can see occupancy and rental growth. I mean, in the most mature markets, we continue to see really solid rental performance, and both the Netherlands and Belgium occupancy in 2021 was back to 100%. And rental growth has certainly strengthened in both markets, but I mean, both markets really did fare well throughout COVID. Belgium PBSA seemed to be the outright performer with a heavy reliance on domestic students. And I know speaking to a few clients in that space, I mean, over COVID, 99% was pretty much the minimum of where they got to, which I'm sure many of you either in the room from across Europe are probably sending daggers their way at the moment. But yeah, it's a really compelling story. I mean, the pandemic saw investors and lenders become increasingly sensitive to pre-leasing performance as well. And the dynamics of demand and supply in key university catchments. But we expect continuing scrutiny of the strength of the performance of universities particularly, and NOI, which overall, and the overall offering that cities provide to students. Just a word on rental growth, and clearly I think in today's environment, you know, there's the inflationary story that's happening at the moment, but also bear in mind also that the regulations and the ability to really kind of start pushing rental growth. We expect above average rental growth this year, namely driven by cost push inflation, but we may see rents go significantly higher in some markets. In the free market particularly, where student numbers are jumping and create local demand shifts. But for 2022, we are expecting to see growth of 6.7% in the free market in Amsterdam. So then just a word on the bars which haven't appeared on that graph, which is useful. So if you can just imagine a red bar in between some of those numbers, that'd be great. But I mean, across both markets, yields are really strong, and the demand for income-producing product is a real driver. And I think at the moment there's a sense that in some of the more core markets, rising interest rates, risk-free bond rates and swaps are all making investors really wary of lower yielding product. However, I think as we all know, this is a bit of a spike at the moment, and the long-term view on the secure income nature of PBSA is still creating strong demand and competitive pricing. And we can see that in other markets, in CE, for example, where actually interest rates are now up in dizzying heights of 6% and plus, where yields are a kind of 5 to 5.5, and there's still plenty of appetite and deals taking place. So I think, I say, there's a long-term view, depending on the type of capital, and how long your hold is. But ultimately, no one's kind of just piling into gilts or bonds just yet, which is always encouraging. So, just checking, we still don't have any bars, but all good. In Belgium, I mean, the product is still really mixed from the transactions that we see. We have seen some tightening in the prime net yield, and that 4.25 is probably getting closer to 4 now for prime product. And the rent profile, certainly looks really attractive relative to other markets as well. I think the big question really then is the depth of the market at the moment, and how far then can institutional investors entering the market kind of be able to grow those platforms, particularly in the light of with Zeal kind of taking over the Quares business and actually just kind of growing the product even further. But I think it's quite encouraging, because we're starting to see a lot more of an institutional push around what the product type looks like. But just looking at yield deltas as well, I mean, student still looks really good value, and compared to other, let's say, historically more favoured asset types, it looks attractive both in the UK and in Europe, just as a comparison. I think it's probably fair to say some of the commercial sectors feel like they're kind of cooling off a bit at the moment, but the living sectors remain a really strong inflation hedge, and the interplay between kind of multifamily, build to rent, and student is causing some deliberation for investors and developers in certain markets. But either way, I think the volume of capital targeting European residential overall is undoubtedly set to increase significantly. And I think there are certainly arguments that students should be closer aligned with resi for similar zoning, licensing, or permitting situations. Just a couple of bits here, which I think probably don't even scratch the surface of some of the conversations that are being had today. But I think the supply-demand imbalance remains, one of the cornerstones of the investment thesis of these markets, and the problem certainly only seems to be getting worse. And great that we're having a relatively open discussion about it today. Affordability is always a hot topic, particularly when it relates to private landlords. And I think ultimately there is, from an investment point of view, I think affordability is great. It creates a really sustainable income stream for investors. And I think being able to find the right location to build the right kind of product is super attractive and super interesting. But ultimately, when it gets to a point where regulation in any market is getting to the point where it's stifling investment and development, it certainly makes it difficult, and we'll come on to a bit more about that later in terms of the factors that implement it. But just following on from the conversation from the panel just before, I think the demand is definitely increasing significantly, international and domestic, and continues to exacerbate the imbalance. I think the international story here, which I know the Nuffic report kind of goes into a bit more detail on, but I think this just puts it into perspective. And the interesting thing about the international thesis is, I think historically some of the viewpoint has been, internationals are great because they come over to your country and they spend loads of money, and it's great for GDP, and it means you can kind of rise, they can afford better rents. Ultimately, the point is that generally speaking, they need accommodation when they come over. So at whichever level they're trying to access the housing market, whether or not it's for student or whether or not it's for just private resi by landlords, it puts more and more pressure all across the board. And also, just also a note on the impact on young people as well. So this is kind of population projections across Belgium and the Netherlands over the next 10 years. I think someone made the comment earlier that that the population level for the Netherlands particularly is pretty flat at the moment. But I think the younger trend for university-age people is certainly on a downward trend. However, HE participation is still growing, and following the significant imbalance, there's still plenty of headroom for student housing in the market. Oh, great. So there's a few spots on here. Has this got a laser? There we go. Nope. So around here, just around here, guys, bloody warm that screen. Is Brussels, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, which I would say is useful to see. So we may have to circulate some slides later. But ultimately, this just highlights the level of provision that these cities have versus the number of students. And I think they sit in an area there between 10 and 20 bed space, student bed spaces, which is still horrifically undersupplied when you compare it to other elements, other parts of the market. The other angle on this is also one of the points around innovation hubs and innovation-led cities. And we do actually have another graph, which I won't try and get, but kind of pinpoints where some of those cities are. And actually, they're on a seriously strong trajectory for attracting international talent. Ah, great. So what does the supply look like in both of these markets? I mean, here you can see some of the provision of bed spaces in each city. In Belgium, as you can see, there's a really good balance between private and university. However, in the Netherlands, the supply is very much driven by the private sector. We'd therefore say, I think in Belgium, there's certainly further growth for the private sector, which compares to the overall provision rate of about 6% for Belgium. And the private sector will certainly be looking to pick up some of the slack on that. In the Netherlands, I mean, we've touched on the action plan earlier and the strive to basically increase delivery of student housing. And I think I guess I'll leave that debate for the next panel on how that's going to be delivered. But student certainly falls kind of quite far low down the list. Oh yeah, that's good. And just jumping back to the build cost inflation point. So I think once we're putting in the layer cake of how you deliver student housing commercially, cost inflation certainly hasn't helped for developers. So once you've got the rent controls, the availability of land, the rise in interest rates, swaps, etc., cost inflation hasn't really helped developers. So look, we've seen a massive spike. I think there's probably a little bit of a sigh at the moment that we're starting to see it cool off a bit, which is certainly useful. And there's even talks of fixed price contracts coming back, dare I say it. So really exciting stuff there. But yeah, look, I think on a serious note, it's certainly going to help out. I mean, it's not going backwards anytime soon, put it that way. But I think there's certainly a catch up, and actually from an investor point of view, just having some visibility on some level of stability is certainly going to be useful. And just jumping back to the supply point, I just thought I'd compare a couple of the markets and see that provision rates are relatively low. There's the 6% that I mentioned in Belgium compared to the UK and the US. But actually, the Dutch provision rate compared to the US, looks relatively good there. But ultimately, as we know, all of these markets are still horrendously undersupplied, because even though that sounds like a decent number, and the UK is there at 34%, which is by no means the benchmark for where these numbers should be, but that hasn't even reached saturation yet. So I think there's certainly a bit of a growth there. And then finally, I just wanted to whip you through a couple of comments. Internationalisation, we've touched on it before, and mobility plays a really key role in the growth of the sector. And from my point of view, we certainly shouldn't be talking about restricting the movement of these guys. And I think it goes wider than PBSA, as touched on in the previous panel. We're talking about these cities as innovation hubs, and these cities want to to attract and retain talent, not just for for their universities, but for them to grow businesses. So these kind of smart young kids that are coming in and starting up businesses and incredibly clever, actually have a huge contribution to GDP as well. So I think it's also something to bear in mind that kind of when we do have, or when any city has these students coming to their city, then there should be a real focus on trying to retain them as well. And then also, sorry, just another point on the lens of kind of economic headwinds, where the sector has always performed pretty well, whether it was the kind of 2008 crisis or I think COVID's probably a bit of a skip point, but from an investment point of view, we didn't see a huge amount of drop off in the market, and especially for international markets like Amsterdam and Brussels. When you start to see the student mobility increase, generally, we often talk about this over times of distress. Where do people go? They just go back to education and go to university. And also just a word on who's the growth of students living in PBSA. So I think in many markets there's still a kind of real focus of students living in kind of private flats or in the unregulated sector. But just to quote here, 73% of second year, from a survey, 73% of second years living in PBSA recommend their accommodation to existing first years. So it really is a shift towards. And then also, we couldn't go through without mentioning ESG either, which is quite an interesting one actually, because I mean, it's not really for this conversation today. I think there are far more important things, but it's quite interesting to see that younger generations are starting to pay more attention to this and are certainly more aware of their environmental impact. And some of the forward-thinking design incorporating environmental and also, importantly, the S, so the social, into their projects is making them leaders in their fields. And finally, markets like the Netherlands and Belgium are also going to move higher up the agenda for investors too. Another stat to add here is that 36% of investors in this survey we carried out expect student to be the most likely to outperform of all residential subsectors. So on that note, I will leave it there. And are we handing over to panel or are we doing questions?
Would you like to do some questions? Does anybody have any questions?
Excellent.
Okay, fabulous.
Either I've just covered absolutely everything, or it's still being processed.
Absolutely smashed it. Well done, Stuart.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. I would absolutely love to be able to take credit for not putting those bars on there as well. I thought that might have been quite a funny joke, but yeah, I think you pulled it back. Well done. Yeah. So some really interesting things to think about there, particularly, especially around the kind of affordability point. I think we're in quite a unique position as a sector as well to really redefine what affordability means. But again, I think that's a conversation to have for another day. Up next, we have a wonderful pre-recorded video from Herman, who used to be the partner of Quers. He is an expert in the field of the Belgian market. So we're going to start off by listening to his insight first. And then we're going to go over to the state of student living, which I'm super excited for because the types of panelists that we have on there, we have Brian over there. Hi, Brian. Most people know Brian, who will be moderating the session. He will be kind of delving into the state of student living and actually how we're going to try and deliver some of those bed spaces. So we have Student Experience, who have a really unique, amazing model, who focus on the BREEAM excellence and sustainable products, but also have this kind of really unique makeup in terms of lengths of stay and types of stay, which is really cool. We also have Greystar, who most of you, and some of you may have seen this morning, some of their products, which is absolutely not only beautiful in terms of the attention to detail in their architecturally and design within their buildings, but also the agreements that they've made in terms of being able to create affordable rents at scale. And then we also have Duo, who is undoubtedly the kind of the driving force for the social sector for the student accommodation in the Netherlands. So I would like to hand it over to the video. Hopefully that'll work.
My name is Herman du Bois. I've been working in student housing accommodation for the last 10 years, only in the Belgian market. We had followed the market, supply and demand over the last 10 years, and have a good relationship with institutions like universities and high schools in Belgium, and also, of course, a good knowledge of what students require as an occupier, as a tenant. Having said that, we have made a transaction with Xior end of last year, where we have sold our portfolio of about 1,300 units to Xior, and now it's integrated in their business locally in Belgium, which is a step forward for the students, of course. Well, there is also in Belgium and even in the media recently a very important lack of quality supply, whether it is private supply or PBSA supply. Overall, in the main markets in Belgium, there is price increases of rentals due to this shortage, and in reality, the value for money issue is very present with the students asking for, on one hand, affordable housing but quality space, on the other hand, for more expensive rentals to have high-end solutions. But the main question remains the affordable housing, and that's a big challenge for the next 10 years. Well, it all starts with, of course, information and knowledge of supply and demand, and transparency, which is in Belgium a challenge to get a good idea on what the requirements are, what the volumes in demand side is, and on the other hand, the supply side. It's getting better now, but for a long time, the universities had ignored the increase of demand coming from foreign students and others. It's a policy matter at the level of universities, at local level, where for a long time, up to recent times, there was a misjudgment of what was coming in the market, and which is now resulting in this lack of supply. Belgium also is complicated to have permits obtained to get students integrated in the city centers or even in the peripheric areas of a city, students. So it's a complex challenge. Nevertheless, a lot of work to be done, and I guess it will take another 10 years before the supply and demand quality-wise will be in balance. A lot of capital is required to construct those residences which are really required and demanded by the market. So the opportunities are there to invest, of course, also to operate on a more professional way. Some universities in Belgium have also realized that the outsourcing of the operations is an option and maybe a good thing to go forward, and having more investments in their core businesses and the housing outsourced to professional parties like Xior, for instance. And then improving the quality of the residences. But the most interesting challenge for the next 10 years is also the aspect of hospitality to be integrated in the services rendered to the students to accommodate them in at a higher quality level. The bridge between the ESGs and the affordable housing on one hand, combined with the financial markets where ESGs is also very present, how to match the financial market requirements on funding of affordable housing. how do investors and financial institutions look upon their contribution in going forward to solve this problem of lack of affordable housing for students.
Well, thanks, Herman, for that those sage words of wisdom. Sorry you couldn't be here. Round of applause for Herman, everybody. You can hear it from Belgium, I'm sure. Well, listen, thanks for inviting me along to chat and participate in this panel session on the state of student housing in the Netherlands. I have some involvement in student housing in the Netherlands, but I will defer to these fine ladies who have far more local expertise than I have. So my role here is relegated to asking questions and listening and learning. So thanks for joining. But first of all, if you can introduce yourselves, that would be really helpful. Annelies, do you want to go first?
Yes, I'm Anneleen Laca. I'm from the board of Duo. Duo is is the biggest, I think, student housing company in the Netherlands. We are a housing association, but we will talk about that later. We have 30,000 housing units, mainly in the cities of Amsterdam, Delft, The Hague and Leiden. And my former job was being the regional director of Leiden. So I know a bit about the business, yes.
That's great. Hanneke, how about you?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hanneke. I'm the Regional Operations Manager with Greystar Netherlands and responsible for the operations of the Our Domain portfolio, so the asset that you've seen this morning, the location in Rotterdam, as well as the location in Diemen, where we have Our Domain and our campus. I'm still fairly new to this business. I only started a year ago, but very happy to be part of this panel and to have the conversation this afternoon about the housing.
And Juliet?
Hi everyone, I'm Juliet. I'm from Student Experience, the Director of Student Experience, and we are a developer and operator of student housing, currently in the Netherlands, but expanding to Spain as well. We have over 2,400 beds in Amsterdam, divided over 4 locations, and I'm in charge of all operations, so happy to share my experience with you in the Netherlands.
Terrific, thank you. So what we thought, we're talking about the state of student housing in the Netherlands today, so what we thought would be interesting is to start off with a brief history of student housing. So we thought you could, as a representative of Duo, who've been around the longest,
Yes.
I think you can bring us up to speed with where we've been in the past.
I will do my best. Yeah, I saw one of the charts from the former speaker, and I saw that there were private and there were universities, but actually in the Netherlands, the universities do not provide in housing anymore. So unlike Belgium, for example. But it is also true that the housing associations come forth from the university. So it's already in the 60s and even before. But I'm afraid those buildings are not existing anymore. But even from the 60s, there was purpose-built student housing, and it was built by the university itself, and it was meant to solve a problem. It was not about investing or profitability. There was a big problem, and there was no affordable housing. Actually, nothing new, and now we are proud to still own those buildings, because afterwards those housing units from the university, they came housing associations, and that is like Duo and like the Kei, and there are a few more in the Netherlands. And those buildings are still great examples of purpose-built housing, because I think now we see that well-being has become so important, also thanks to the crisis we had with Corona. And those houses, they have great facilities in terms of community. And one of our big tasks, apart from building new, is cherish those buildings and making them up to date again, so we can keep them for the future.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because we see across Europe different countries, different universities taking a very different approach to the provision of student accommodation, from universities who feel it is part of their mission to provide the accommodation, and they're very focused on delivering accommodation solutions for their students, right the way to different countries where maybe the university doesn't understand why they should be interested in student housing, and they see it as completely a job for the students and the private sector to accommodate. So, but we've been hearing today, and we've read in the press a lot about this huge shortfall in student accommodation in the Netherlands on the supply side. So way more students, not enough beds. Lots of people talking about 60,000 beds required in the Netherlands. What I would say is that most European cities and countries have comparable supply-demand dynamics and comparable figures, and quite regularly come out with big headline attention-grabbing numbers like this 60,000 figure. But somewhere on the continuum between 0 and 60,000 more beds required is probably where the Netherlands is. I would it's probably more rather than less. The converse in somewhere like another country, maybe a Belgium or an Ireland or a Spain, might say 250,000, but actually probably need a lot less than that as well. So the question here in the Netherlands is, how are we going to find 60,000 extra beds? Now, turning to Greystar here, who are a very large investor in the Netherlands in not just student, but other forms of residential accommodation, where are you seeing the opportunity to address the supply side imbalance here? Because to be honest, in other countries, we're facing the battle of you're fighting for students. The game is getting students to your residence, not the Greystar one or not the student experience one or whoever else. You're fighting for lettings. Here, that's not the game. The game is let's try and build buildings. So what's Greystar's strategy for that?
Well, what we believe is that we need to build at scale, and I think that's what you saw this morning as well. That scale will help to bring up the number of housing on maybe smaller plots. In Rotterdam, we built a building of 612 units on a very small plot where everybody thought there's no way that there could be another 24 floors with 612 units there, students and young professionals enjoying the space. And what we believe as well is that we should build at scale, but also for different, the mix of target markets. So students in combination with other target markets where you also can work on the social cohesion of the area, that is not only for students, but a combination of that.
Yeah, so you do have some big mixed use schemes, don't you, of students and regular residential. And I wonder, are you seeing a lot of bleed across of students who you kind of targeted for the student blocks, but they want to live in the resi blocks? Are you seeing that as a trend?
Yeah, you see that there's a combination of people who started to live with us, and then at a certain point they want a different type of product. So in Southeast we have seen that people started to live in the first block that was delivered, and then started to move to the other blocks when they were delivered because of simply a bit more space, or the combination of moving in with each other, a boyfriend, girlfriend, or friends together. So we see that shift around.
That's interesting. And I guess, Julia, just turning to you on the supply side. So what are the key barriers that you're seeing to being able to deliver more assets? Is it the availability of equity investors? Is it the availability of land? Is it the complicated regulated tenancies and the point system that we see in the Netherlands, which is probably more regulated than most markets that we see across Europe? What's your kind of barrier? How do we break down those barriers?
I think it's a bit... It's complex. It's a bit of all. What we see in the market is that we want to be creative. We have different types of buildings. We have modular buildings, but we also have permanent buildings. We do long stay and short stay. So very flexible concept, very flexible way of building. And I think that is what we need to address, that we can work together in different ways, both with all the stakeholders, the municipality, the government, universities, to see how we can manage that.
I understand. And speaking as, I guess, an international investor, we definitely see that we love the Netherlands, we love the supply-demand dynamics. The returns are difficult to calculate, the point system is difficult to navigate, and because of that, the viability of the schemes gets called into question. And we've heard about build cost inflation today as well. And Stuart's slides had a lot of facts about that, which is inevitably a headwind to delivering more supply in this jurisdiction. So, are you seeing more opportunities to deliver more beds fundamentally as student experience doing a lot more Netherlands, or are you kind of pivoting to Spain and other countries because it feels a bit more straightforward?
Well, it's easier to develop in Spain, to be very honest, but we are open to develop in the Netherlands as well. We want to offer more student housing in the Netherlands, if that's possible, of course.
If I may interrupt, because the rules are definitely a problem in the Netherlands. There are many rules, and on each rule is maybe not a bad rule, but altogether it gets impossible to build. But I would like to point that the point system itself, we are all talking about affordability being very important, and it's one of the systems that make sure that houses are affordable and that the houses that are a bit more expensive have at least a very good energy label, for example, so that there is a relation between the quality of the house and the price. So saying that the point system is a problem in the Netherlands, I'm objecting. I think it's a good system and it can be better. I think it's also necessary that we get a better system for the shared houses, because there the point system is a bit old-fashioned by now. But I think if we are addressing the rules, we have also we have to look into the spatial rules. Our favorite topic is, of course, the problems around Schiphol, that you cannot build there. There are too many rules, and even the national government is at this moment a bit contradictory, because they want us to build, but at the other side, they are very strict with the rules again.
Yeah, that's great having an argument on the panel. I love this. So I totally get that, and I think it's great that Dutch students can access really good quality, low priced accommodation. I think that's very positive, and I find it really personally really interesting, because we have a debate in the UK about affordability, and I go to conferences about student accommodation. And the affordability question comes up regularly, because there are many students in the UK who cannot access purpose-built student accommodation because they can't afford it. And when I was going to university, I couldn't afford the good stuff either. I had to have the subsidized accommodation from my university when I was growing up. So I kind of understand that personally as well. But the conclusion that the UK, I guess, PBSA developers, suppliers, owners, operators in the private sector have drawn is that it's not viable to build PBSA in the UK. I'm using the UK as an example because it's a purely open market system, apart from some slight nuance in London. So you can't build something in the UK and make a return for an investor for less than £160 a week, which is not affordable for a proportion of students who are going to university in the UK. So we've tried everything to become more affordable, deliver more affordable product. How can you, let's take the ensuite out, let's have larger cluster flats, let's whatever it is to try and create the additional density to generate the return that the investors and the developers require in order to build them. So I think what we see is if we put affordability constraints into the UK, and we've seen it in London where they've attempted, what that did was choke off supply. We've seen, I think earlier on today, there was a statistic about Berlin where the rent controls came into Berlin, and what we saw is actually supply moving out of the market. So we saw the kind of dysfunctionality of what we would describe as heavy-handed government intervention in the sector. So so I do wonder if some of those rules were relaxed, whether we'd see more development and then the market would begin to control prices, or indeed we can bifurcate the market to a Duvos-style social housing student and then open up more of a free market for, inverted commas, open market student. Is there more of a trend towards that? Is there any appetite in government, do you think, to do that? I get you might not be supportive, but do you get that more supply equals more beds?
I definitely get that. And in an ideal world where there's a lot of land, I think it may work, because if you get enough of supply, in the end the prices will drop to the level that people actually rent it. If not, you have to lower the price. But I think the Netherlands, and neither the UK, but that I don't know so well, is not an ideal market, because there are almost no locations, definitely not in the city centers where the students want to live. So you get an imperfect system, and in that imperfect system, it's good to have some basic principles. And of course, we can talk about this a long time, because it's also a political discussion. How do you remedy the imperfection of the market?
Yeah, I don't think anybody's cracked that yet, for sure. And just one other question on Duo when you're there, because you're offering these people great accommodation, very low price. How do you make sure they go? Do they leave when they graduate? Do they vacate the accommodation? Do they just...
Yes, and I don't know if you know it, but I think so, because you're investing in the Netherlands. We have the campus contract system that really makes sure, and I think private and public partners are very happy to have this system, because that makes actually sure the student houses remain student houses. And that means that after half a year, more or less, you have to leave. And then, of course, you can have also an interesting discussion about what do you do for those people who have to go out to their houses, but don't have easy access to the normal housing market. That's also definitely a problem.
Of course, because we forget that we're only a small part of the overall residential market, and fighting for the same space, the same beds, the same tenants in the same jurisdictions, right? So it's still a real thing. And I get your point about the airport, because I tried to buy my son a drone for his birthday, and I live near an airport, and I've been told I can only fly the drone east from my house. I can't fly it west. It's a very strange thing. But I guess just moving from Duvo, I think, is there any opportunity for the private sector to work more closely with the social housing sector, the likes of Duvo in the Netherlands? Is that something that's been explored so far? Maybe you could help us, Hanneke.
I'm not sure if that's been explored, but I think what is always good to do, and I think we heard it earlier today as well, that you open communications about the market and how you operate yourself and how you are able to connect with the other party in order to learn from each other and maybe bound forces in order to focus on the ability to develop on spots or on locations where we have jurisdiction which is not helping.
And have you seen that, the same question, but about universities? Is there opportunity to collaborate closely with universities? Maybe they have some free land that's available. Is that the case, Juliette?
It's definitely helpful, and as you said, it's good to work together. My experience is that, especially in the Netherlands and in Amsterdam, you're not competitors, you're colleagues, and you can learn from each other, but you can also help each other. For example, with the legislation of Schiphol Airport, where both private and public companies can work together, but also with universities, municipalities, because I think we all want the same thing. They're telling us you cannot build student housing here because of the regulations, but we all want to. So there is a go from all parties except for the legislation part, and I think we can definitely find each other there.
Okay.
Work together.
So if I were to give you a magic wand and say, go on, I'll leave it. You have a comment?
Yeah, I want to comment that I must admit that we certainly have been triggered by private parties to improve the quality of our own facilities. So I think that's also the learning factor, let's say. And you say I didn't know if it has been explored, but there are some examples of good collaboration between private investors and social houses like us. That was because somebody was in for the long term and there was a financial crisis and wanted to buy the building, and we have been then the people to rent it out, let's say, the operator, you call it in English. And so I think it's always possible to work together.
And how would that be structured? You've done that in a lease arrangement where you take the risk on the lettings? Yeah, okay. That's really interesting and could be an opportunity for more private sector capital to enter the market with good quality leases from somebody like Duvo, which sounds great.
Yes.
But I was going to say, if you had a magic wand to change one thing to increase the supply of student accommodation, what would that be, Annelien, for you?
Yeah, now we're going to repeat it. If Kronenburg would be possible, then we have about 2,500 extra houses. Yeah. I think that's a magical one, yes, because Amsterdam is really the most difficult area with more than, I don't know the number, by 20,000, shortage of 20,000 until 2026. So let's try to make that one possible. Yeah.
How about you, Julia? What's the same?
Would be great. Yeah, it would definitely be great. We see the demand for student housing is so high. If we publish an ad for a studio at Student Experience, at the moment we get 600 students responding to one studio, which is, I mean, if we can add 600, in our case, extra studios at Kronenburg, that would be great, because a lot of students now are having trouble finding student housing.
Interesting. What do you think? If you had this magic wand and you couldn't do this one?
Yeah, difficult question then. But if we had a magical wand, I think what is needed to involve certain municipalities to get certain legislation differently, and to get them to the understanding of what we actually do. And that's, I think, the benefit of showing. They have the ability to show a product, that we bring municipalities over and show them the product, so that they do get the understanding of what we actually do, and to intensify that and making it more easy to start further development.
I think that's definitely a good point, because local policymakers, they have great ideas and they have also good reasons to invent all those rules, but they really have to become more pragmatic and understand what it is to develop a building with all these aspects, and that you always will have to make compromises.
I think that's a really valid point, isn't it? Nobody's an idiot here. Like, the guys on the other side making these rules have very good reasons for doing them. And it may be a little bit more understanding, and environments and conversations like this one and the work that the Class Foundation does is invaluable to help educate people in all of the territories that we go to about what it is that we do. And it's not, I feel I'm quite evangelical about what we do, and I've done it a long time, and I've done it in a lot of different places, and everywhere we go, people are like, oh my God, like 500 students in one place, not in my street, no chance. And actually, when we walk them through it and they get to experience the sort of communities that we're building and the sort of environments we're creating for these young people to thrive, inevitably people's views on the sector change. So in the Netherlands, where maybe lots of people haven't much experience of the purpose-built student housing sector, maybe it's just a little bit of understanding and education which will help you a lot. So let's hope so, and we can keep doing that. But I suppose, pivoting slightly from that demand side of the equation, I suppose the other side, the supply side, the other argument is, do you stop as many students going to university? And there are people in the Netherlands lobbying for that, to reduce participation or indeed reduce the number of international students, which is, again, most countries are trying to increase international students who bring in investment, pay higher fees, bring in soft power to the country, and are generally accretive to the regions. Do we think that movement in the Netherlands will gain traction? I mean, if Britain can leave the European Union, and a movement which kind of went from nothing to insanity in no time can happen in the UK land, is there a chance that Netherlands just close the doors to international students? Annelien, do you think that's possible?
No, I don't think so. But I think it's also about getting the good balance, and I think the universities have talked about that. And we always said our student housing has to be for everybody, and also for the international students, and we do see all the advantages of that.
Yeah, really. What do you think, Juliette?
Yeah, I agree with you that I think that student housing should be for everyone, but it has changed over the years. When we started 7 years ago, we had 8% international students in our buildings, and right now it's over 45%. I can imagine that it's challenging for international students to find housing, and finding the right balance with universities and housing providers is very important to prevent students also from living at a place with low quality, or maybe not even finding a place, which happens. I mean, we sometimes have students on the phone crying, saying, I'm coming to the Netherlands, but I literally have nowhere to stay. Can you please help me? And I think that's something that we should take into account as well.
Yeah, and we've seen students in tents, I think, haven't we, as well, in Groningen as well, in temporary accommodation. And that's a factor we've seen across Europe, when quite often a particular university isn't joined up and their applications team aren't speaking to their accommodation team. We sometimes see a serious mismatch. So I think you do have that in pockets, but here in the Netherlands it feels a bit more pervasive, and it's been going on for a bit longer. So hopefully we'll come together in this room to a solution. I think we'll do that eventually.
I think adding more student housing in Amstelveen would be a great solution to that.
Okay, we'll write to the paper. So just to pivot away from the commercial, the supply-demand dynamics, I think Stuart touched on the ESG point before, and again, I'm quite evangelical about that. So who wants to take us away? Anna, do you want to tell us about Greystar's approach to ESG and how the student is differentiated from perhaps more resi products?
Yes, well, we're still, in all honesty, working on a really good ESG methodology on how we deal with reporting and how we deal with managing that part.
because it's not only about tracking things in regards to ESG, but also making sure that we actually do it. So before, in the meantime, not having that fully ready, I think we do a lot of things to focusing on ESG for our different brands at the different locations where we try in our developments to think about energy efficiency, working with local suppliers, making sure that we work like with block heating and not with gas in our buildings, and ensure that they are sustainable for the longer term and not only for the first couple of years, so that we develop the buildings for a longer time. And at the same time, on the ESG part, really focus on the social part, making sure that we work on the well-being of the students, making sure that we offer them products that they really use. For example, with Tulu, we work very closely with them in order for people to use the products, that they don't have to purchase their vacuum or their window cleaning, or that they can use it from the shared products. And all these little things will help to to make a good plan of how we look at ESG, and working very closely as well with certain tenants. We have a tenant in our domain Southeast. He is a researcher, very focused on the environment and working on healthy air. So we work with him on putting oxygen bars in the amenity spaces for clean air. Work with him on the water, to making sure that we have something in there, that the water becomes more clean. And he's actually a researcher for the World Health Organization. So he uses these things to, also for his publication. So these are things very fun and great things to explore with tenants as well as with the team that we have there.
Well, we love the free consultancy from the students, don't we? That's the way forward.
Yeah.
So in the Netherlands, we go back to ESG. First of all, I think in general, as a sector, we are very well equipped for ESG. We put students into dense environments in urban city centres. They don't have cars; they walk to uni or they cycle to uni, and so in general, I think we're pretty efficient. One thing in the Netherlands where it's different is because the utilities aren't included, or there's a true-up on the annual true-up on utilities through the service charge, unlike in most jurisdictions in Europe where we include the utilities in the rent. So the landlord pays the utilities in other countries, and in the Netherlands and in Germany, a few others, the tenant pays their own. Does that, whilst creating an added incentive for the tenant to be perhaps more energy efficient, does that remove the motivation for the landlord to create energy efficient buildings, I wonder? What do you think, Annelien?
In our case, I would say no, because we, being in a housing association, we are also required, let's say, by the government, if not technically by laws, but morally required to really do something about sustainability. So we have made our sustainable plans to get all these nice dwellings of the 60s or these monuments from many years before, to also to make them to the standards of today. And I would also want to point out that the Dutch student is a student who in our organization, we have organized it by, they have like, I don't know, a small council, and they do complain with us, and they do require that we have to do something about the buildings which are not very energy saving because they're old, or the windows have not been renovated or whatever.
And that's really interesting, and from a socially conscious organisation like Duvo, that's really interesting. I totally get that approach. I think I love your moral imperative versus the legal one. In the UK we've got a government which won't do anything, even if it's legal or illegal. They don't. Moral doesn't even come into it in the UK, so don't quote me on that. But pivoting over to a commercial organisation, so look at you, Hanneke. Same question, really. So Duvo, we know, will do the right thing, which is invest in the buildings to make them more efficient. You're a commercial organisation working on behalf of investors. Can you do that? How would you do that? Or do you just it's somebody else's problem, they're paying for it?
Yeah, I think they're also changing their perspectives on it, that it becomes much more important for them to look at those values that bring on to the experience of the people living in the buildings, but as well in the end what it brings on the financial side. I think investors and banks, for example, they're also questioning now investors with what is your ESG focus and what do you do about it? And otherwise you're not getting a loan, for example. So I think this change that investors will also have now the need to focus on ESG, not only for the moral thing, but also for, in the end, the investment part of it.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. So the moral is that buildings will become less valuable unless they are sustainable, and we're definitely seeing that in the wider investor market, where they're saying we're not going to buy something that's a D-rated or E-rated. We want AAA everything. And I think as individuals, as organizations, I think we're all I'm being slightly facetious, pushing around on it, but as individuals, I think we all want the same thing, and it's really great that we've seen the private sector taking a lead globally especially in sustainability, where governments have kind of been more afraid to legislate. So I think people taking steps forward, and again, in environments like this, working together, I think will make a difference, which is super exciting. But pivoting over to the S here, and looking at you, Juliette, and I have a vested interest here because you're going to operate one of my buildings in Leiden, as you know, in a couple of years' time. So how do you, in a let's say a low rental environment, and when I say low rental in terms of the actual net operating income available to the investors is lower than it would be in a different comparable country because of the controls on rent. How do you deliver a social program, let's say, in the Netherlands with this lower rental environment? And you're also about to be operational in Spain, which is kind of free market rents and much generally broadly higher service levels. So how do you still deliver a level of social engagement and service in the Netherlands on a arguably a tighter budget?
Well, for us, it's a personal interest as well. What we do is we have a management team on site who actually has a meeting with every student that come in. That might sound like it's a lot of work, but it actually helps us a lot with getting to know the students. And getting to know the students means that we can offer them a social program that they actually want to, which saves money. If you're going to organize something that they don't want to, it's not good for the students, it's not good for us or for the owner. So it really helps that the people have a personal connection with the students and kind of keeping it simple, having our own community platform, giving the students the opportunity to organize events themselves. We basically provide the space, we help them with that. Sometimes we sponsor things to make sure that we don't spend too much money on social engagement, but do it with the team that we have by simply talking to them.
Okay, so more collaborative approach with the student body, right?
Exactly.
Than necessarily organizing a bunch of puppies to come along to stroke every Thursday afternoon. You get the students to be heavily involved in that.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see what drives them, what interests them. Their emotions and their feelings have changed, especially over the last few years with COVID. We see a lot of anxiety among students. Well-being has become more important, and our experience is that simply talking to them, looking after them, checking if their curtains are closed too long, and just asking them, how are you, how's your family doing? That's what works best for us, and that's what we call community building, really building on the relationship with students in the building.
Yeah, personal relationships
Exactly.
are more important than anything else. That's great. So one final question. I know we'll run out of time. So let's say we come back here in 10 years' time and we're sat in this room in front of this incredibly hot projector going red, about to drink cocktails to cool down. In 10 years' time, we come back here and the four of us are sitting on this panel. What's going to be different? What will be the difference in Dutch PBSA? Anneke?
I hope we have many more great examples of products and diversity in the products that that the market is offering, so that there is a good competition and people can select where they want to live, and that they are not forced to just take something because there's no place to go, and that hopefully we may resolve the 60K housing problem in 10 years' time. Would be a nice dream.
Great. So more choice for students. How about you, Juliette?
Of course, having more supply for students, but also keeping the quality high and following the students and their needs and make sure that they're still being met. Because in the last 10 years, a lot has changed, and it's good as a both private and public company to address that.
And you, Annelien, final thought?
A lot of houses, very sustainable with a focus on well-being, but affordable. So the must-haves must be there, and the nice-to-have, sometimes we will have to cut it because it's important that people actually can pay it.
Beautiful. I'll be sending my kids to study in the Netherlands and live with you. Right, if you can put your hands together and thank the panel, everybody. Very helpful discussion.
Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
We're not taking questions.
Oh, tough.
Yes, hi. A lot of our customers, they do transformation to create new residential apartments, beds. And I was wondering what your take is on doing transformation instead of building new things. Especially for the Netherlands, we don't have a lot of room. But for instance, one of our customers, he's transforming churches, former police offices, former banks, creating quite a lot of beds for students, in fact. So I was wondering what your take is on that.
Good question. Can I start us off, actually, because I think that raises a really interesting point, which is about what we call embodied carbon. So we're all focused on making buildings sustainable and having high insulation, but people forget that if you knock one down that was already there, you're releasing all that carbon into the atmosphere. So it's much less efficient from a carbon perspective, to knock it down and rebuild it. And also when you're rebuilding it from scratch, and we're doing a major refurbishment in Madrid at the moment of an £80 million hotel, putting 40 million of capex into to create 700 rooms. So saving the embodied carbon, we're also insulated from the escalating concrete and steel costs, and the construction cost inflation is therefore more manageable. In the past, we would have chosen not to do that because it would have been cheaper to knock it down and build a new one. However, in the current market, we're being forced to be more sustainable, which is quite a nice way of doing it. So I think that's quite interesting from an embodied carbon perspective. But in terms of converting an office block or a church in the Netherlands, is that something we're seeing, Juliet?
Well, it's not something that we're doing right now, but it's definitely something that we have explored and I think could contribute to the housing market problem. So good question, yeah.
Great. And Annelien?
We have been doing it, and we're still doing it. And I recognize a lot the dilemma in Dutch, the dilemma that you have when you have this building, which is not ideal anymore, but still suitable, and it can be insulated, can be made ready for the future. And then the alternative is to just throw it down and build it all new. That are really difficult discussions.
Absolutely. And I think I was going to say one other thing with the people on this panel, we tend to move in big numbers and big buildings, and the refurbishment is much more easy in 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 apartments. So I think as a general theme, that might be more easier for the smaller investors, for sure.
I just wanted to ask, if we can do one more question, we'll cut the final remarks shorter if anybody else does have one. Fabulous. Just get my steps in.
Thank you very much, Bart Sassin from Spatial Experience. My question would tap into hybridization and diversification. So point one, when it comes to hybridizing the buildings with like different typologies, bringing F&B or retail, let's say on the ground floor or on the terrace, what is your take on this? And I would like to maybe, I know Grace there, so let's ask Juliet about this. And when it comes to diversification, I think Annelien, I'm really curious, whether Duo is taking any actions on addressing the housing shortage for young professionals and maybe also like seniors, and like delivering other type of products that the market misses, like using your intel basically to diversify and provide better options, for more demographics.
Yeah, we definitely do that. We have a lot of commercial spaces in the building to make sure that we not only offer something to the students, but also to the area. I heard you say people are not very happy when you say 500 students move into the neighborhood, but they can bring so many good things, and also adding commercial areas where the people, the local people from the neighborhood can come and visit could definitely help. It enriches the environment.
Yeah, I will move to the second question. We also have like a so-called student career. So you come in as a young student and you really want a shared facility. You have to get to know people. So then the shared facility housing is really nice. And then you grow older and you are, you want more privacy, and then you go and live in a studio. And we have, although in a very small quantity, also the housing type that comes afterwards. Our reason to exist is student housing, so it's not so easy for us to say let's do 3 other target groups also. So we are really trying to stick to our purpose and the reason why we have been founded. But it's definitely a responsibility we also feel. We have also a good example, for example, in Leiden, we made a campus and we do the student housing, and then we're working together with the private party who's doing the starters housing, how it's called. It's called like that in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Cool. Any more questions? Can we go for a drink now? Or are you going to finish? Okay.
So Frank.
Yeah, I don't know if I know yet if the 60,000 units will be built in 2030.
Can I see a rise of hands?
Yeah.
Who thinks by 2023 there could be 60,000 new beds that are built?
Who is optimistic?
Who's Nobody? No, we've got one in the corner over there. Well, okay.
Okay. Well, then there's still some work to be done.
But I think there's a real issue around this ideology from the municipalities, but also the local residents, that houses need to be built outwards and not upwards. And in the real world, if we want to keep creating these urban spaces that are thriving, we need to start building up.
Yeah.
And, there's perfect examples of Greystar, and it's about scale.
Yeah.
And there isn't, creating maybe just student complexes on their own also might have its negatives and its positives,
Yeah.
But you look at redevelopment areas where there's absolutely nothing else going on. We need to start somewhere. And there's other things that come with that, other different types of housing, other opportunities for co-working spaces and other developments.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I think there's space, but one of the things that also with Jolande and the other stakeholders we've been talking about is making sure that the urgency is there. Yeah. And I think that was, for me, one of the takeaways also from the earlier panel is like, okay, understanding how complex it is the first step, acknowledging that we need each other, second step, and then starting to work together. Because I see, for example, indeed, the example of Greystar is interesting, not just because of the scale. I think it's 1,500 units in total, but also it delivers alternatives in the market, new solutions. I know, for example, although it wasn't discussed here, that there's also an agreement with the city to deliver a certain amount of rooms at a lower
in that area as well. Yes.
Yeah, but also at a lower rent. So there's rent differentiation within the building, which is something that the private sector can do. Maybe even within the point system, create some flexibility there. So I think there's a lot more that we need to bring, with groups like Kences together in these conferences, and hopefully we can do it. I know from an investor's perspective that the demand for this kind of housing, especially because they're looking for ESG type of investments, is going to grow. I mean, this is going to be really interesting. And also in our practice at the Student Hotel, we have now models where we get green financing, but also social financing. Yeah. So for example, with UniCredit, we have now a scheme that we get money, basically funding for them for scholarships to subsidize for certain students and to help them with talent support programs. So there's a lot of innovation that is still being tested by us. And the internationalization of the capital and the attractiveness of the Netherlands was also clear. So Also, probably Bart-Jan and his gang will still have a lot of work to do.
I think there's also a lot of room as well that what we're doing in terms of the types of assets and developments that we're delivering, there's actually a lot of stuff that we're still not measuring and don't know how to measure.
Yeah.
So I think there's also opportunity to be able to gain more value in other areas.
Yeah. And also what Florine was pointing out, like if we understand that relationship, we can also set targets like, okay, so what do we find acceptable? 25% of international students like thinks their housing experience is really bad. I mean, we should be able to do better, right? Yeah, so we...
Of course. And also just think about what the makeup of our cities would be like without international students.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the Amsterdam that we know and love.
Yeah. Yeah, and quite frankly also, you know, I think it's maybe a little bit dated to think in nations.
Of course.
We created in Europe an amazing reality for this generation and the next generations.
I wish the rest of the UK saw
to
that.
study and work abroad. I mean, outside of the place where they were born. And I think that, you know, like the way we set up the markets, and it's imperfect. But this generation is going to take advantage of it. And if it's not the public universities to offer English taught programs, it will be private universities to offer those experiences, because it's what people want. Like this generation wants to have international experience. The technology is there to stay in touch. You know, the education programs are there. The work opportunities are there. So I think we better accept it and then start building the kind of communities that we need.
Yeah, we've got we are our clients, the cohorts that we're actually building for are such unique, complex, advanced, even, you know, I'm 10 years older than some of these people, 15 years, pushing it. And, you know, they are so, you know, environmentally conscious, socially conscious, you know, we're building for a different type of person.
Yeah.
And there's so much unique opportunity. And I think cities, HE, and the private sector and the social sector have so much opportunity to be able to do something that's good and amazing for the next generation.
Yeah.
As you know, we can continue talking about this all day.
At the bar.
So obviously at the after drinks, if you would like to come and chat with us, debate, or tell us we're wrong, either way. There's so much opportunity for that.
Yeah. And we're going to continue to do that throughout Europe. So we're going to meet again in Milan in a few weeks.
Yeah, on the 14th of July.
Yeah, with amazing new projects. And then we go to London.
Yeah, in September the 8th.
And then we go and have our big conference that happened last year here, but now we're going to go into Madrid. Where Juliette and others have been building really amazing projects, so lots to see there too.
And if you haven't been to one of our conferences before the annual conference, it is something to be reckoned with. So, yeah.
Hopefully with a boat tour before that too, or maybe a little bit shorter than
there's
yesterday.
no canals there, so we better get digging now.
Yeah, but without the partners, never possible. So thanks again for the amazing support that we've received, and of course the hostess of the mostest, Loyens Loeff.
Yes.
Also in your new building. I mean, incredible to see it.
How incredible is this building?
Can we invite you on the stage for?
Yeah, please.
Maybe.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, any takeaways from your side?
Well, actually, when I was just looking at the last panel, so by the way, I'm Bart-Jan Zoetmulder. I'm a partner here at Loyens. I'm also an ambassador to the Class Foundation, so I'm very proud to be able to promote the activities, been involved from the start, actually, with the Class of 2020, when Frank asked me to join and assist in setting up the foundation even. So it goes a long way back. Well, thank you for that. So when I was just looking at the panel, I thought, well, I mean, as Loyens, actually, we said Brian from Roundhill. Well, we know Roundhill very, very well. And then the Utrecht, the Rock was sold to Greystar. We were involved in that, and actually the Leiden project there as well. And then I heard that actually a student experience is going to run that one, and then. I was thinking to my own personal situation. I have 3 sons and a cousin from the United States who study in the Netherlands. And one of my sons was in a house of duo in Delft. My oldest son, he is in Groningen, and when he moved to Groningen, indeed, that was around the time that you had all these tents. And then Roundhill had not yet built Zernike. So it wasn't ready yet. So he's in a fraternity house now, which is actually also quite nice. But it's a totally different type of accommodation. My cousin from the United States, he came and he last year he moved into the student hotel, and now he's in Xior in Sloterdijk. So it's also optimally making use not only of the accommodation that has been built or rebuilt, like Xior or refurbished, but also the community around it. And I think that is super important. So especially with my cousin from the States, I see how important it is actually, if you're from abroad, that you actually let's say walk into an environment where you have a lot of internationals that you can relate to, even though he speaks Dutch, but nevertheless he's American. So that's super interesting to see that as a experience it myself also as an uncle and a father, and as a partner of this firm, assisting also on the legal and tech side. Now, last remark. You were talking about ESG, very, very important topic. The reason why we are in this building today is because we would love to have you here in our new building, relatively new building. We moved in September 2020. After 9 days, the doors were shut, so we couldn't come anymore, at least hardly. But this building was really built to suit in a way. We have a lot of people who work here who used to be students, and they have a lot of wishes on what kind of environment they want to work in. And a sustainable building and a smart building, that is something that is super important for them. And so when we started to discuss with the project developer, we only rent this place, fortunately, but because there's no reason to own it. But when we started to discuss the development here, we said, okay, we need this and this and this, because this is what our associates are asking for. This is also what our clients are asking for. So we thought, why not, let's say, live the dream and make it into something fantastic. And well, I mean, if you walk around, you see all the green, the green walls. You see the water outside, which is actually the rainwater, which is filling the basin over there. There are bee colonies here, and that's just, I mean, they just put everything in that you can imagine, solar panels, etc. So it's super important for us also, because for ourselves, and well, also to show that we care. So as a present, I wanted to give the Glass Foundation a book about this fantastic building, and I really hope that you will return. We have hosted this event many times in our old location, but I think this suits perfect. So please come back and put this in your library at the Glass Foundation. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Just one last thank you again for attending. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon and you join us for cocktails and canapes from Glide. Continue talking to each other, continue talking to us, and I wish you the best of evenings. So thank you.
Thank you.